Thanks, Jen. So before we formally start the meeting, I will go to each voting member present in turn to confirm that they can hear and be heard. It's a legal requirement for virtual meetings. Where possible, please also have your video switched on so you can be seen by those in attendance and by the public watching on the YouTube. And please would other attendees who are not voting members introduce themselves and make their contribution to the meeting. Mark Willimont from Herefordshire Council. Can you hear me?
I can hear and both see you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Willimont. I can hear and see you. Powers Council, the voting member I have is Councillor James Evans. Do we have Councillor Evans or another voting member from Paris Council? Do we have any members present from Paris Council?
You've got myself, Peter Morris, as an officer present, but I can't see another member.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. I was going to come to you next.
Thank you.
You're here, and I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Right. Okay. That's my. There I am. I haven't clicked. There we go. Thank you.
There we go. Lovely. Thank you. But we have no councillors.
I will see what I can. I will double check. I haven't had any apologies, but whilst you're going through this,
if you notice one joining the meeting, if you could just flag us up, that would be.
Will do.
Very kind of you.
Thank you.
Welsh Water, Mark Rychanovsky. Do we have him today?
Mark Rychanovsky is not on today's meeting, and also Sharon Evans has had to give her apologies, but I'm standing in for Mark and for Sharon. My name's Fergus O'Brien. I'm Welsh Water's Wastewater and Environment Services Manager.
Thank you very much, Fergus, and welcome to the meeting.
Thank you.
Simon Evans, the Wyask Foundation.
Can hear and be heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Simon. Welcome.
Thank you.
From the NFU.
Hello, yes, I can hear.
Hello, Sarah. Welcome. Aled Jones from Farmers Union Wales. Nope. Helen Dale from the CLA.
Yes, I can hear.
There you are. Thank you. Nick Reed from Farm Herefordshire.
Present. Hello.
Hello, Nick. Nice to see you. Environment Agency. We have, I think, Dave Throop is dealing with flooding, isn't he? So, who do we have?
It's Andrew Osbaldeston here. I can hear you fine. Thank you.
Hello, Andrew. Natural England, Claire Manette, or somebody else from Natural England.
Claire might be in the waiting room. I think Sam.
We have got Claire's iPhone in the waiting room.
We think that might be the same.
Oh, she appears. NRW. Who do we have from NRW? Do we have Anne Weedy? Anyone here from Natural Resources Wales? Mary Albright, the HCILG.
Hello, Chair. I can hear and see you.
Hello, Mary. Nice to see you. Herefordshire Wildlife Trust, Helen Stace.
Hello. Yes, I can see and hear you.
Good afternoon, Helen. Nice to see you. Brecon Beacons Planning, Christopher O'Brien. Anyone else from Brecon Beacons Planning? Or Brecon
Yes,
Beacons?
sorry, I couldn't unmute. It's Tracy Nettleton. I'm Head of Planning Services in Brecon Beacons. My apologies for no video. I am tagging through my phone. So I'm only on voice mode because it uses too much of my data. Apologies for that, but I can see and hear you. Thank you.
Good, thank you and welcome.
Thank
Do we have anyone here from Monmouthshire?
I think they sent their apologies in the end.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm not expecting anyone from Forest of Dean either.
Likewise.
No, okay.
Lester, it's Claire Minette here. Can I check you can hear me now?
Oh, Claire, wonderful. Yes, I can. There you are. And I can see you. This is
Excellent.
better and better. That's wonderful. Brilliant. Welcome, Claire. Nice to see you. So thank you. I'm now going to formally open the meeting. The agenda papers and other relevant information are available for public viewing and have been circulated. Please email Jane Little if you need a copy of the papers. The council is streaming the meeting on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and making an official recording. The recording forms part of the public record of the meeting, will be available via the council's website shortly after the meeting has concluded. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum. Ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Please remember that others are permitted to film, photograph and record our public meetings, provided so long as it doesn't disrupt the business of the meeting. When colleagues wish to speak, please use the raise hand icon in the participants list. If you struggle with that, then if you raise your virtual hand or put something into the chat, we'll try and pick up on it. And please remember to lower your virtual hand after you've spoken. The chat will be enabled for this meeting. Please bear in mind it is FOIable. Questions raised within the chat will be captured and answered subsequently. Are there any questions on the proceedings?
Alyssa, can I just ask you to note that I'm also present from the Brecon Beacons National Park Authority, James Marsden.
James.
At member level, I chair the policy forum of the Brecon Beacons National Park Authority.
Just
noted for the record. Thank you.
James,
thank you very much.
James, I'm just saying I'm going to just change your name so that we don't call you Greg's Pit.
Thank you. That's kind.
Yeah. Right. That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Chair, can I just clarify that we're just kind of sitting here? We're not voting members, so the likes of myself, Sir Phillips,
because we have such a high level of interest. I thought it's literally we shorten the meeting.
No, we'll sit here and keep quiet.
No, don't keep quiet, Councillor Harrington. But I'm not checking everyone present because it would go on for.
No, that's lovely. Thanks.
My apologies for that, but I think that sort of seems sensible. Okay, so agenda item 2, which is the minutes of the last board meeting held on the 30th of September 2020 and matters arising. I've just got a couple of matters arising. One is that Dave Throop had said he would bring an item on abstraction to this meeting. Obviously, he is otherwise engaged today dealing with flooding, so he can't be here. But if we could make a note that that's an action carried forward, and the board would still like to have a report on abstraction in the catchment, please, from EA.
Sorry, can I just jump in? I haven't been sent anything, I'm afraid.
That's quite all right. I think it was something that Dave was going to do, and we have got loads on today's meeting anyway, so you know it's
we'll get that to you.
I didn't want to get lost as an action. Right. Yeah, there is an action where possible the board to get longer to review documents prior to the meeting. I can reiterate that because I got these papers last night. So if it's possible to kind of get it a little bit ahead of time would be awesome. And that's it for me. Do we have any matters of accuracy or matters arising from the last board meeting's notes?
Chair, I noticed that there was an item about the amount spent on voluntary measures.
Yeah.
And I wasn't at the meeting, but I can confirm that since 2016, 120,000 has gone through Farm Herefordshire. Some of that has been ring fenced, for example, for videos and for evaluation. But the last payment that Farm Herefordshire received as a network was in 2018, and the bulk of the activity is carried out by individual members, such as the Wynusk Foundation. But 120k of voluntary attempts since 2016.
Thanks, that's really helpful. I hadn't put that because you weren't there, so it wasn't fair to include it as an action for you, but I'm grateful that you came up with those figures today. In any event, thank you, that's very kind. Simon Evans.
Just one correction to the minutes, which was in, so I flagged it in the minutes. It's on page 2, I think. No, it's on page 3, sorry. Page 3, and there was a minute from me, which is climate change and overuse of phosphates is a potential major issue. Work is being undertaken on green recovery based on regulatory compliance, and this evidence needs to be widely circulated once completed. We bid for a project under the green recovery to review the efficacy of farm scope under certain regulatory framework, certain regulatory levels. Unfortunately, that bid was unsuccessful.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for the update. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the formal business of voting on these notes. Those contributions having been duly noted, has anyone got any further corrections or changes to the notes? Otherwise, I will take it that we're all in favour.
Alyssa, question from me. Why are agri-environment schemes not included in the list and the amount of money committed to voluntary initiatives? Agri-environment schemes are voluntary.
I think at the moment, James, we just need to agree the notes, not the of the notes, and then we can move into the more discursive part of the meeting. So if somebody could bear that in mind when we get to that bit of the meeting and answer that question, it would be great. Thank you very much. So we'll take that as approved and move on to agenda item number 3, which is the Refocus presentation from Shane Rothwell. Thank you so much, Shane, for agreeing to come here and do, I know what will be a frustratingly brief version of what is an absolutely fascinating piece of research that you're doing. I think many people here have seen the longer version, but for those who have not benefited from that, it will be a useful introduction, and hopefully they will take something from it. So over to you, Shane. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah. So I'm just going to share my screen and then just check that you can see everything and hear me. So
that's working for me, Shane.
Okay. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. So yeah, thank you. I've met or chatted to a few of you before. So I'm Shane Rothwell from Lancaster University. I work on a project called Refocus. To give it its full title, The Role of Phosphorus in the Resilience and Sustainability of the UK Food System. We essentially are looking at how we manage phosphorus in our food system at the national scale, the regional scale, and the catchment scale. And our catchments of interest are the Upper Bann in Northern Ireland, the Welland in Leicestershire, and obviously the Y catchment that you'll all be very familiar with. I literally have 10 minutes to try and convey key messages about what it is we're doing and some very, very preliminary key findings. So bear with me. It's going to be a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully I can get across to you some of the key information about what it is we're doing and what that information might mean. So the first thing I want to share with you is what we call CQ analysis. It looks really, really complicated initially, but it's not. It's really quite a simple process. What this does, it gives us some information about where phosphorus that's arriving in the river may be coming from. And it is all based on the relationship between the flow of the river, the flow of the water in the river, and the concentration of the phosphorus in that river measured at the same point. I've just got 3 little examples here that just give you a demonstration of how that might work. So here for the Frome subcatchment within the Y, we have here a very clear relationship where when the river flow increases, the phosphorus concentration decreases. And then this is very diagnostic of what we call a point source introduction of phosphorus to the river, which is typically a sewerage source. So as the sewerage source is going into the river, as the flow increases, that concentration has been diluted by the flow. Conversely, here we have the Rosemond This is very diagnostic of an agricultural loss to water, what we call a diffusive loss to water. And as we can see, as the flow increases, the concentration in the river remains fairly stable until a threshold point where we're starting to get the diffuse losses from the agricultural land. And then what happens as the flow increases, the concentration of phosphorus actually increases. We can start to break that down a little bit more. We look at the seasonality of when the measurements are taken. So this is what we're looking at here is the diffuse losses that are occurring in the Rosemont. And if we look at the seasonality of those, what we generally understand is that in the spring and the summer, that will be when the fertilizer and the manure, sort of fresh applications of P, are put on the land. So if they were dominating the P flows, we would expect to see a peak in those times of year. In this particular example, we don't. So what this is suggesting is that this diffuse loss of P is more than likely coming from soil losses of P. It's diffuse loss of soil and soil erosion getting into the river. And this is basically what we call legacy P that we'll move on to next. Just a note on this, we are working with very old data with this. We really need up-to-date data. We've got requests with the EA and NRW for that, but really for our messages to be current, we need up-to-date data. So I mentioned legacy P. So what is legacy P? So fundamentally, it's all that phosphorus that has accumulated in the soil from historic inputs going back over the last 50 or even 100 years. What we are doing, and I'm doing this piece of work myself at Lancaster, we have collected soil from our 3 different catchments of interest. We are running what we call an accelerated drawdown trial. The reason we're doing that is if we did this in the field, it would take decades. So essentially we have soil that we've collected in the catchments in a controlled environment room. We grow ryegrass as a model system. We harvest or we offtake every month. We measure the biomass production, we measure the phosphorus concentration, and we also do some monitoring of the soil phosphorus. And fundamentally, we keep doing that. We push it really hard until we get to deficiency, until we've exhausted the phosphorus supply. So fundamentally, what we're doing, this figure on the right, is, so these are our different soils from within the Y catchment. The red bit at the top, this is our Olsen P, so that's an agronomic measure of phosphorus in the soil, what would traditionally be recognised as being bioavailable to the crop. The entirety of the bar, the red and the grey together, is all the phosphorus in that soil. So that's the total phosphorus in that soil. So the question we're asking is, how much of this extra phosphorus or legacy phosphorus can we tap into above and beyond what we're measuring as our agronomically available P? Now we can scale that up. So we can scale our field trial up to the landscape scale, up to the field scale. Sorry, our pot trial up to the landscape scale. And I'm just going to quickly just demonstrate to you 2 examples here. So we just take the area of the pot and the depth of the soil, we scale it up to hectares, and we're just going to look at 2 examples with 2 of the soils and with 2 different cropping types. And we're going to ask the question, how long would it take with these 2 cropping types to draw down that legacy P or access or that legacy P that might be available? And those 2 crops, we're going to look at winter wheat and we're going to look at grass. So our first example here is soil 3. This had a very high Olsen P to start with, so it's an index 4. For those of you with an agricultural knowledge, what that fundamentally means that agronomically it's very high in P. We have taken off in our grass system the equivalent to around 200 kilograms per hectare of P in our crop. In our model system, what that would look like if we were growing winter wheat is approximately 9 years worth of harvest. Or if we were growing grass in our system, it would be approximately 11 years of harvesting that we've managed to take off so far. And in this particular soil, it's still going well. So there's still more legacy P to tap into in this soil. Soil 6, one of the other soils, this is one of the lower soil phosphorus samples that we collected. So it started at very low index 3 on the threshold of index 2. So not far of where the accepted agronomic optimum is, so where it perhaps should be. We've taken off the equivalent to around about 130 kilograms per hectare P. If we were growing winter wheat, that's approximately about 5 years worth of winter wheat, or if we were growing grass, about 7 years of growing grass to get to that same situation. And this soil is now at deficiency. So it's looking like in our model system, we've pretty much exhausted the legacy P in that particular soil. So this is asking, you could look at this two ways. So first of all is if you're wanting to draw your soil down to a sensible agronomic value, how long might it take? The flip side of that is, well, how long could you farm without phosphorus inputs as fertilizer or manures? And moving on very quickly, so the third thing I just want to share with you is a catchment P balance. And for this approach, again, this is work that I've done. We're using an approach called substance flow analysis, where we use available data to quantify and map the flows of phosphorus through the boundaries or within the boundaries of the catchment. So I'm going to go straight into it. I'm going to show you the model that we've developed, and I'll explain to you what it's telling us. So this is our SFA, or our substance flow analysis for the Y catchment. The boxes that we have in here, we call these processes. Basically, within the livestock process, so this is all the livestock that sit within the catchment. Agricultural fields, this is fundamentally all the soil that sits in the catchment. Agricultural products is just a process that allows us to handle all the agricultural products that are coming out of agriculture within the system and export them or distribute them. And then at the bottom here, we have human consumption. So we have the food and the detergents that humans are eating and the subsequent wastewater treatment associated with that. The arrows between the processes or coming in and out of the catchment are representative of the phosphorus flows associated with the movements of materials in the model. The units are in tons of elemental phosphorus per year, and the width of the arrows is representative or is proportional to the size of the flow within the materials. So what is this telling us? So initially, straight away, we can see that livestock are dominating the P flows within the Y catchment. So the phosphorus within animal feed is by far the largest input within the Y catchment. Manure is by far the largest flow of phosphorus within the Y catchment. There's around about 5,000 tons of animal P manure in the catchment. What we can see is that the soil P inputs are going into the soil. We have manure, we have fertilizer, and on here we've got some biosolids that are going into the soil. Those inputs exceed the offtake. So our offtake is in the grass and fodder crops and the arable crops within the system. So the inputs are exceeding the outputs by around about 34% in this model. What that means is the system is running in surplus. And this 2020 here, this is the annual surplus of phosphorus within the catchment. So approximately 2,000 tons excess phosphorus is accumulating within the soil within the Y catchment every year. That equates to roughly about 8 kilograms per hectare over the productive ground. Our estimate is around about 75% of the agricultural losses to water from agriculture, and around about 25% from wastewater treatment. I've been asked just to try and explain that 2,000 ton surplus a little bit more. This is a breakdown of the manure inputs that are going into the system, the annual production from the livestock that are within the catchment, again as elemental P. We have the biosolids and we have the fertilizer input as well. So if you wanted to achieve a balance within the catchment, so you basically want to try and remove that 2,000 ton surplus, what would that look like? Well, it would be equivalent to all the fertilizer that's used and about half the poultry manure output. Or alternatively, we could look at it as it's half the fertilizer input, half the cattle P, and half the poultry manure. So you can see it's quite a striking and fundamental misbalance between what's going into the system and what's been taken out of the system. Further to that, if you were to want to tap into the legacy P and actually go into a drawdown situation, you'd need much bigger reductions on the inputs. Again, I was asked to try and help you visualize what 2,000 tons of manure might look like. There's been discussions around maybe exporting manure as a management option. These are very much back of the envelope kind of calculations. These is very much dependent on the material itself, things like its dry matter, but 2,000 tons of manure P approximately looks like 1.5 million tons of cattle farmyard manure or 500,000 tons of poultry manure. But note that the cattle and the poultry on their own do not produce the entirety of the 2,000 tonnes excess. So just to summarise very quickly, we have a CQ analysis that can hopefully indicate the source of the P that's arriving in the river, but we need more recent data. We have a legacy P trial that can hopefully indicate how long it may take to draw down, or how long you may be able to continue cropping without yield reductions, without P inputs. We have a substance flow analysis model that is showing there's currently around about a 2,000 tonne phosphorus surplus within the entire Y catchment. That's about 8 kilograms per hectare. And reducing that surplus and or drawing down legacy P is going to need system change. And I think I've run over by a couple of minutes, but that's your whistle-stop tour, and I'm more than happy to take a couple of questions if we have time.
Thanks, Shane. That was absolutely brilliant. I see we have a hand up from Andrew Osbalderson.
Yeah, thank you, Shane. Something that came up at a meeting only last week. Can you just confirm, Shane, you talk about the catchment, does that recognise all of the catchment, all of the management catchment in England and Wales? Those figures you've put up there, that is the whole combined. Yeah, that's
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Sarah Faulkner.
Yeah, I think it's it's obviously really interesting, but I think the key thing for us is to really understand what this means agronomically, and to get this information in front of agronomists and farmers so that we can get their view as to how realistic this is and what the challenges would be to try and implement this, because a lot of careful thought goes into crop planning before people apply fertilizers and manures. There are rules around what can be applied through the new farming rules for water. So what we need to do is understand what people are currently doing and how this work that looks at drawing down legacy P, how that fits into it, and what that really means for farming businesses, because this is really interesting, but we really need to now start to drill down to what this really means for businesses, because that's the next step.
Yeah, I think that the legacy P trial the legacy P story is really interesting. What I will say, comparing to the other catchments, it looks the legacy P that's in the Y catchment looks to be very bioavailable. So there is a degree of confidence there that if people stop putting P inputs in there, yeah, the P that's in the soil is available to the crops. But you're right, it's about behaviour, and it's about a leap of faith. If you're not going to put your fertiliser or your manure on, it's that belief that actually, you're going to be okay. But there is a limit to it. We're looking at 5 to 10, 15 years, and then you need to move into more of a balanced system. But you're right. It's how do you persuade people that tapping into that legacy P is a viable option?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point, and something that hopefully we will be exploring later in the meeting. Simon Evans.
Hi, one thing that came out of the question and answer session in the Refocus presentations was that as we load our soils past the point at which they can hold on to phosphate, the rate of loss from the soils is going to increase exponentially. Is that the case? I mean, can you confirm that? Because that was one of the answers that came back from Paul Withers, which is frankly quite scary. Yeah, I mean, so to be perfect, that's Paul's area of work, the CQ analysis. So I wouldn't, I'm not fully qualified to talk about that. But what, again, tied in with the legacy P, so we're saying that the legacy P within the soils is bioavailable. What basically means that, it goes into the water solution very, very easily. So what that also means that in the wrong situation, yeah, that P can end up in the water, so drainage subsystems, etc. So there's another pathway into the water. But again, we need more up-to-date data, yeah, to really fully understand this. I mean, some of the data that Paul's working with is back from the 1990s, from the 2000s. We've got some more recent data, but we really do need the latest data that we can get hold of. Thank you.
Okay, Mary Albright.
Oh, thank you. Just one quick question and then one other general question, if that's okay, Shane. Do you know, or do we all know, what is the typical P index of the catchment? I've been to a few meetings from the WUF where some of the fields were coming out at 6s and 7s. Would that be typical?
So this would be really, really valuable information to us. So when we start to scale up, so the different soils that we have within the catchments have different soil levels. So if we can get hold of that sort of information, that helps us scaling our legacy P trial data up to the catchment scale. Now we interviewed quite a few farmers down there about 18 months ago now. So we've spoken to quite a few people. I have had access to certain farm soil analyses and such like, but if people have that sort of data more widely in the catchment, that would be incredibly valuable.
I think it's definitely a data gap that we all need to get to grips with, because it would enable some farms to do a different action, and this kind of one size fits all approach doesn't work for housing, it won't work for farming. So that kind of drilling down to specifics, I think, is going to let people have confidence in doing something different. But my other question is regarding the project in general. How long are you guys planning to work on this, and is it something we can help secure kind of additional resources for, if we can help tailor the outcome of it being something that the catchment can use for betterment? In other words, you need more time, more money, more people.
So the project's due to finish at the end of September this year. We've recently we've managed to get an extension for a few months, so at the end of September, and we hope to wrap that up by then. Really, the key thing that we need, and this is what holds us back, is data.
Okay.
And access to the data. We know, all our systems, all our models are all developed. We know what we're looking at. All our methods are developed. It's really just a case of making sure that the messages that we end up with are current, and to do that we need data.
So I think there are a few people in the room that probably have better access to that data. It's just a case of persuading people how we get that. But I have put it forward as a part of the package. We're going to hopefully go to DEFRA to secure data. And how we map that data and how we overlay the different types of data to make it accessible for everybody, so people can make good business decisions, as Sarah mentioned.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point, because I know this is politically very important in the wide catchment. So if people are going to make strategic decisions based on the information we may generate, we need to make sure that it's relevant and current.
Yeah, I think it would be useful, Shane, then to at some point outside of this meeting to drill down on what the data is that you want and the securing it, and we can take that up with DEFRA. Okay, Tom Tibbetts. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, it really draws on Simon Evans' question, but I noticed from the CQ analysis plots, Shane, that you showed, are they really both log scales, log X and log XY, log Y scales?
Yeah, there's an log scale, yeah.
A straight line on those graphs is in fact an exponential growth, I think.
So again, the CQ analysis is Paul's work, so I'm not that qualified to talk about the actual nuances of it.
Okay.
Yeah, the relation. I know that you need to log the data to pull the relationships out.
Well, I think having an exponential relationship shows the fragility of soluble phosphorus in the soils. One other question for you, which is, if all inputs, phosphorus inputs, I'm talking specifically about fertilizer and also imported feed inputs into this catchment study you've done on the 2016 data, if all those inputs were stopped, do you have any idea how long it would take for the legacy phosphorus to be drawn down?
Yeah, so that's what the this I'll go back to it. So this scenario here, that's what that's speaking to. So this is just two examples of two of the soils. So with no input, with this soil 3 here. So far, we've taken off the equivalent to roughly 9 or 11 years of cropping, depending on what you're growing, and there's still more legacy P there. With soil 6, the other one here, we've got 5 to 7 years of growth, and actually it looks like that legacy P is exhausted in that one. I mean, the usual caveats of translating data from a pot trial to a field scale, but within the time frame that we have available, this model system is probably the best way of getting some sort of understanding of the potential there, or how long it might take.
So if we stopped importing chicken feed and chemical fertilizer and putting it on the Y catchment, it might take, say, a decade to draw down a large proportion of the legacy phosphorus, for example.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, that's very useful information. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Nick Reed.
Yeah, thank you. It's really a follow-on from that point, because my understanding when you did your presentation to the Y Catchment Partnership was that even if we took the most draconian measures, we aren't likely to hit our statutory target by 2027, which has been one of the drivers behind this nutrient management plan board, because it could take a decade or more just to draw down on the legacy phosphate. Is that what you're sort of saying in terms of whatever we do, we're not going to hit the legal target, and therefore we need perhaps to renegotiate the legal target?
So can you just clarify by what you mean by the legal target? Is it a soil?
Well, by 2027, we have to, I think it's Water Framework Directive, we should be in good quality. And that's been a driver to this nutrient management plan, that we will achieve the phosphate reduction for the SAC by 2027.
Yeah. So this is just one part of the story. And I think one of the key things about legacy P, one of the biggest drivers of that legacy P ending up in the water is soil erosion. It's a physical movement of soil particles into the river. So it's not just about drawing down the legacy P. It's also about things like the catchment farming initiative, such like that. So if you can keep the soil in the field fundamentally, yeah, that's a huge step towards dealing with this problem. There is also the issue of the solubility, in particular in the Y of the P, and again that's the nuances that may come out with Paul's work with the CQ analysis. But yeah, it's only one part of the story.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Harrington.
Yes, thank you. Shane, I just wondered, obviously the data you've got from is slightly out of date, as you said, but also how comprehensive or how distributed were those data sets geographically? Because if we're sort of asking, well, we're going to be asking and working with all our landowners and farmers to consider not putting phosphorus back into the fields. It's a novice's question actually. How easy is it to check the P of a field for a farmer, for example, to be able to then make a decision?
So we talk about the substance flow analysis.
Yeah.
In the scale, yeah. So the substance flow analysis, or with any substance flow analysis, you work on a boundary, and you need information on the flows of materials across that boundary. Without that boundary, you can't run the model. So this is set up as it's the geographical boundary of the entire Y catchment, both the Welsh and English parts of the catchment. So it is, it's a catchment scale approach. I mean, you can break it down more regional. You could go to subcatchments, but the challenge then becomes the data. Even so, I've done this work at the national scale and at the regional scale. So we've done it for the UK, we've done it for Northern Ireland. It's actually much easier to do it at the bigger scale, at the national scale, because you've got much more certainty over the quantification of the flows of materials. When you start to move down to the catchment scale, actually quantifying these flows of the materials becomes much more difficult because there's no official documentation. But we use national scale statistics and local knowledge to build a picture. The further down the scales we go, so if we went to a subcatchment scale, again, the uncertainty on the actual quantification of those flows becomes quite high, and it's quite a challenging piece of work to do. Yeah, so with all these numbers, there's an uncertainty to these numbers, but So these are based on it was the 2016 DEFRA census. So we've got the livestock numbers, we've got the cropping data. What I will say is, so the regional census is done every 4 years. So there was a census done in 2020 last year. That is normally published in about April. So when that data is published, we will hopefully have time to bring this up to date with regard to having 2020 data. We are in contact with DEFRA. We're trying to get see if we can actually get a sneaky preview to the data before they officially release it. Yeah, and your second point, measuring soil P should be routine for a farmer. It's a soil test. You take a soil sample, you put it in a bag or a box, you post it away to your favorite lab or NRM, someone like that, and you get your data back within a few days. So it should be a routine part of farm management.
Thank you. I've got just two more questions, and then we're going to have to move on. There's some very interesting discussion going on in the chat at the moment as well, which I think we will certainly capture and try and pursue that. Councillor Phillips.
Yes, thank you. Shane, I tried to be very practical about how we're going to take this forward and how we're going to make as big an impact as quick as possible. One of the things and the asks, I think, particularly with the emerging changes to the subsidy regimes from DEFRA, is that in a catchment area like this, which is very sensitive, is that if we extended the green margins that near watercourses, and we do already know those fields that are most liable to erode into our main rivers, and actually effectively put a ban on them, being arabilized. That to me, from what I've always thought whilst that's very simplistic and should be part of a package, but to me that seems to be quite a useful and powerful package. And from what I'm getting from your presentation, that sort of backs up my theory. And I don't know whether if I'm in the right direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, oh, I've got a cup of tea arrived. That's nice, isn't it? Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, so, if we're talking about the legacy P, or even freshly packed any P, yeah, I mean, there's a mode of action for that P ending up in the water. If it stays on the land, fundamentally, theoretically it shouldn't be a problem, but it's not as straightforward as that. But you're right. So things like buffer strips, making sure you're not growing maize next to the river, and you've got bare ground over winter. It's the farming and water regulations, yeah, and it should be fairly fundamental, basic approaches. That I think you're right, and that's, to my mind, that's immediate action that can be taken. Yeah, the questions of the legacy P, it's there, it's an issue that's going to take time. Yeah, but in the meantime, if you can actually physically stop the phosphorus ending up in the water, and that's about management, then absolutely that's the way to go.
It's returning those old riverside meadows to grassland, and there's an issue about how you manage the livestock on there, obviously, but to me, if you return it to where it was, some of the damage has been done by the potato and maize farming right next to those river courses. No, thanks for that. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Councillor Phillips. Tracy Nettleton, Beacon Beacons.
Thank you. Shane, another question. I think I'm reading it right. You said here that 70% of the phosphate loss is to water from agriculture. So from your diagram, does that mean that 25%, the remaining 25%, is from humans, from human beings? Yeah, that's that. Yep. That is it. That yep. is right. That's how I'm reading it.
Yeah,
so
absolutely, yeah. And this data is from the Environment Agency. So this is modelled data from the EA separate model that we're using.
So we'd be quite interested, obviously we're on the Welsh side of the border, so we'd be quite interested to have the data from NRW. Presumably it's similar. There might be slight variations, but 75%, 25%, 75% agriculture, 25%.
Yeah, I mean, again, we've got the resolution of the data is down to, we've got individual rivers and tributaries, so we can look at the data at that smaller scale. But with the separate data, the uncertainty when you move down the scales increases. So, So yeah, and again, so it's model data, but certainly at the national scale it stands up. And if you compare it to other data sets, it seems to be a fairly robust predictor or prediction of what's actually ending up in the river.
Thank you. So presumably the outcome of this then is that it does indicate we need a joined up approach. It isn't just one sector. I mean, yes, it should be proportional, a response, but it's all sectors, isn't it, which need to be joined up and delivering this to try and bring us to where we need to be.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the really powerful aspects of the substance flow analysis as a tool. So, with regard to phosphorus in any system, when you can visualize the system like this, it helps you understand that it's precisely that. It's part of the system. It's not just about the individual. Yeah, it's the entire. It's how the phosphorus flows through the entire different processes within the food system. And obviously, the more you go up the scales, you go to the national scale, it becomes much more complicated. But yeah, it's not the responsibility of one individual. Everyone is part of a system here that's managing phosphorus within this geographical area.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is my understanding, and it's a shame we don't have anyone from NRW in the meeting, but certainly it's my understanding that they were working on a source apportionment calculation, which should be any minute now. I have it. My note is for this month.
Okay.
Part of the review work that they've been doing.
Okay.
So that might help Tracy with your
thank you.
questions. I would keep after NRW on that, and hopefully they're doing that work now. Is my understanding, and I think Fergus O'Brien, you can probably add into that knowledge as well.
I can. I just wanted, you asked about the upper reaches of the Y. On the upper Y subcatchment, the source apportionment puts the figure at about 25%. On the River Lug, it puts it on about 25%. This is the percentage which is human based as opposed to other sources, sorry. And on the lower Y, it's slightly higher at 33%.
Yeah, so obviously this 75-25 is a full catchment average.
Yeah, and are those figures taking into account the current AMP investment, or are they?
They are taking it. No, they don't take account. I believe they don't take account of the current AMP investment.
Okay, so in fact that proportionality would likely change up to.
Yeah, I wouldn't just need to confirm that.
Okay.
But yeah, I believe that is the current. That was the status as of June 2020.
Okay, so with things as they are, and we know that Dercumry are investing in Norton and Prestine. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't confirm. They don't take our current investment period into account.
Okay. So the likelihood that the 25% will reduce, therefore.
As a percentage, obviously, well, as the total, it'll reduce. But obviously, once you start talking about percentages, if you make changes on the other side, on agriculture or anything, obviously the
indeed.
Might
yes, good point. Yeah, absolutely fair enough.
Lisa, sorry, I do have a bit of an update that I'll give a little bit later on the latest model runs, which brings in the basic projected future increase in populations and the AMP investment. So we can bring that in later.
Yeah. That's great. That's brilliant. That'll be agenda item 5. So you'll be doing that. Yeah.
EA update later on.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Thank you. We still want to carry on. Is this pertinent? I have 2 hands up now, Sarah Faulkner and Kate Speak Adams, but we do need to move on to the next agenda item. Is it very essential?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
In terms of data. Yeah, in terms of data, we do seem to go round and round in circles a little. And I had a conversation with the Environment Agency about to try to nail down what is the source apportionment between agriculture and wastewater. And the figures I were given were very different to that, because obviously 75% agriculture is very high. So can we ask Environment Agency to come back to the board, perhaps at the next meeting, and just explain this again? Because I'm quite confused now, because this is quite different to what I was told just before Christmas. So it would be good to have some information from Environment Agency about, you know, what is the actual situation.
We can certainly do that, Sarah, and I think it does depend on where you are in the catchment, and but certainly we can update you with that information.
My point, Alyssa, was just to say that obviously the Catchment Partnership had a longer version of this presentation, and Lancaster were very generous and shared their slide deck with us. So if anyone would like to see that, I'm sure Shane and the team are more than happy for that to be shared with the Nutrient Management Plan Board as well, so we can take that as an action if that's okay.
Yeah, the key thing to remember is this is, you know, this is preliminary data. This is not our definitive output. So I just want, you know, make sure I stress that point. People look at this data, that it's our knowledge so far, but we are constrained by the data we have available, and the quality of our work is dependent on the data that's made available to us.
We seem to have lost the chair.
She has intermittent problems with her internet. Give her a moment, it tends to come back in. Something that was said earlier on, just to clarify, is it right we've got nobody from Natural Resources Wales on this call? Okay, I'm doing my best to try to get somebody.
Yeah, hi Mark, I think you might have been copied in as well. There was apologies sent during the meeting about 2:20 from Anne Weedy and David Lee.
Oh dear. It's like the way it used to be. Okay.
Mark, if you're in the chair, through you, can I ask Shane a question? Because he seemed to hint that clearly there are choices to be made. I don't want to jump to solutions too quickly, but I mean, stopping any further input of pea or manure is one option. Reducing livestock is another. Buffer strips, as Councillor Phillips has said, is another. There are permutations to be played, tunes to be played on those options down the track. And if we're going to ask farmers to amend or adjust their land management practices with a combination of regulation, incentive, and maybe some private sector investment in payment for ecosystem services, we need to try and do it once and at most twice, not many times. And the risk I see here is us looking at P in isolation from other issues. I don't want to widen the meeting out to carbon, but it's coincidental that the Climate Change Committee did recommend a reduction in livestock by between 35 and 50%. And for that to happen in the first 15 years, i.e. by 2035, in its sixth carbon budget. Now, that ties in very neatly with what Shane has been telling us on phosphate.
Yeah. I mean, and nitrogen as well. I mean, that's so, and it's something interesting. This has cropped up quite a few times at different stakeholder groups we've talked to at the regional and at the national scale. Is the relationship between the flow of these materials, the carbon question. There's also there's the carbon footprint of the agriculture and the livestock itself. There's also the question about carbon in these materials that are moving, and carbon sequestration in the soil, and also all these materials contain nitrogen as well. So one thing we are exploring for the future is developing our models to include nitrogen and carbon, and we're in very preliminary discussions, but we're looking at trying to put a funding bid together that helps us understand the relationship between these three quite very important materials. So, but yeah, I mean, very, very complex, but you're right. When you look at phosphorus in isolation, and you explore managing phosphorus in isolation, you are potentially ignoring some of those other key aspects of the activities that are going on, particularly around carbon and say nitrogen as well.
Good. I think, thank you, Shane. I think we got our chair back, but without video. Is that right, Councillor Swinglehurst?
I think she just left us again, actually.
She's
Mark.
left us again. Okay. I don't see any more hands up. I'm conscious we probably need to move on to the next item, but if there's anything burning, if we can put it in the chat, we can pick that up. And Shane, please, if you can, stay for the rest of the board meeting and talk to us. I know I've asked you one question through the chat, a cheeky one perhaps, but if we can talk to you that way and we can continue on that way, that would be really useful. But on behalf of the board, thank you very much. I know some of us were very, very privileged to be able to sit through one of the seminars earlier in the year, or was it end of last year, I think. And it was a real eye-opener, and we really wanted to share that with here. So I know you wanted to give more than 10 minutes in your presentation, but actually it was the questions I think we wanted to get, having you summarised it so well. So Councillor Swinglehurst seems to be back again.
I'm just back. Yeah, I'm clearly having some sort of an infarct with my internet. So Mark, if I disappear again, just take over.
I will take over seamlessly. I'll just have to. Somebody might have to point it out.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you.
That might be straight away.
Thanks very much, Shane. That was excellent. So the next item is the Jenny Campbell.
Can I make a start, Alyssa? I lost you there quickly.
No, I think what she said. It's the next
Jenny,
item. If we can go, what the tag offered to us, please, that would be really. Jenny.
Okay.
Thank you.
I've got an update from the technical advisory group that support the NMP board. This update doesn't include updates on current progress and work within each organisation, because that will be covered later on this afternoon. TAG met at the end of November 2020, and we met last week as well. There's been continued progress with updating the action plan by NRW, EA and NE, and it's likely by the next board meeting there'll be an updated plan available. There's a separate briefing on this, which I'll cover after I've done this TAG update. In the meantime, TAG are compiling a list of all the measures that could be implemented in the catchment with their associated costs where we've got these. It may be that some prove unaffordable, however, it will show what can be done if funding was available. A full list will be available the first week of February. We'll consider if any of these suggested measures are able to be brought forward more quickly should additional funding become available in the near future. The list will include proposals, as I'll go through quickly now. Just a list that we've come up with since the TAG meeting last week. So some of them are kind of measures that you'll be familiar with, and others are measures that maybe people have added, new measures that people are adding on. So there's use of sustainable drainage systems. There's a whole catchment survey of soils and land use, including satellite mapping of land use and collection of livestock numbers. A project officer, so we could use a person to lead the work with technical understanding, who's able to bring thinking on planning and agriculture together. At present, there's not the resource within NE or EA or NRW to bring all this work together, and it's hampering progress towards solutions. We could use modelling. The SAGES modelling to date has shown us the phosphate source apportionment and the amount of phosphate that is being exceeded. Following on from this, there could be detailed scenario modelling to understand which options will deliver the most reductions and where and when we need to target the effort and what is needed. Another suggestion has been increased agricultural regulatory visits by NRW and Environment Agency, and the wider use of phosphate monitoring, such as in-river sondes. Another suggestion has been further investigation into phosphate levels in specific areas of the catchment, such as Redbrook, where we may be seeing higher levels than could be expected. We could look at extending current projects, such as the Wales Dairy project, which is due to finish in 2021. There could be the production of a phosphate calculator. I think that might be in progress partly being developed in association with Herefordshire Council and Ricardo. There could be delivery of more integrated wetland schemes. There could be the creation of a phosphate trading platform. There could be continued implementation of natural flood management schemes in the catchment. And there could be additional event duration monitoring at Dŵr Cymru of their intermittent sewage discharges. This might be in place already. I think it might be a requirement now. So somebody from Dŵr Cymru can update us on that if they know a bit more detail. We could use some ecologists to identify the most effective areas for buffer strips, cover crops, silt traps, woodland and wetland planting. We could look into reduction of phosphate animal feed. We could review the plans, possible plans to build a manure processing plant in the Y catchment. We could look at soils and put measures in place and change of practice to run down P levels and use the Refocus research that we've just heard about to help with this. Funding could be put towards a food and agri partnerships that's being led by the Wynhusk Foundation. There could be financial support to farmers who are working with Refocus for the non-application of phosphate to their land, so that any reductions in yield can be underwritten or compensated for over a set number of years, whether that's through ELMS or another process. These are just a selection of the ideas that have been discussed, and there'll be a complete list with as much financial information put together by TAG within the next couple of weeks. Has anyone got any questions on that? Okay, what I will do now is I've got a quick update on
sorry,
the
Jenny,
action
I was a bit.
plan.
There's a question
What
from
we've done.
Councillor Harrington.
Sorry, Jenny, I was a bit slow off the mark. I beg your pardon.
Yep. No, go
that
ahead.
sounds great. I noticed dependent on, to some extent, you're saying it's dependent on funding coming through. That's the message I'm getting. So it's therefore
yes,
the whole as politicians to try and back to fight your corner on that one. So I'm just making that point.
Yes, and some of the measures obviously are more costly than others, and some of them are, they may be able to be brought forward should there be funding available, more quickly than otherwise, because obviously there's a lot of measures that could be done, but a lot of them are, funding dependent, and, there will be a stage where some of the measures, if we had more funding, then, we're going to come up with a list of, which ones could be brought forward more quickly if we had funding.
Good. Could I just mention, sorry, on behalf, because I know Councillor Swinglehurst would want to say this if she would, and I see we've got a question also coming in from Helen Hamilton too. But I think, that there is a wish list, isn't it, of what we were asked very quickly to do at the TAG of should there be DEFRA funding. Jesse Norman said at a meeting that he would be happy to take that through to DEFRA and George Eustace, Secretary of State for DEFRA, to see whether or not there could be assistance, but we needed to work them up. So in order to work them up, and bearing in mind the amount of work and that long list you have, Jenny, there's thinking that perhaps if there could be a very streamlined group within the TAG, perhaps one key member from each of the agencies. So that would be EA, Natural England, NRW, Welsh Water, to quickly work that up, because we're going to need some figures, facts on finances, feasibility, etc., aren't we, to make that actually happen? Because with the greatest respect, the last TAG, there are over 30 people there, and we just won't get anywhere quick enough to be able to do that. Obviously, some of the councils might like to be involved in that as well, but I would say you probably need to keep it to no more than half a dozen. That's what Councillor Swinglehurst and ourselves were talking about before the meeting. If we really want to turn this into something that we can then put back virtually to the board, because we don't need to wait for the board to perhaps pursue with these. Does that sound, because you're the chair of the TAG, does that sound reasonable to you?
Yeah, that sounds sensible. And also, just to make it clear, that was just a selection of items. So since we had the TAG meeting on Thursday, it was agreed that anyone who had further items could send those to me before the meeting now. So I've had quite a few items sent to me from different organisations this morning, and that's just a selection. So there are, if your organisation sent me some items, and I didn't read them all out, that's fine, because I just picked a selection from each reply to my email that I got. So there are other items on that list, but that was just to give a selection really of the kind of things.
Mark, Jenny's list is admirable. However, it's not yet, and hopefully by February it could be a meaningful and credible plan of action. It seems to me that the agencies already have a model of how to do this. And Jenny, you will know how the agencies work together when they work on the asset management programme, water price review, list of schemes to inform the water price review. Large spreadsheets of possible measures are looked at, scrutinised, costed, tested for effectiveness, and then prioritised. We're in an almost identical situation with this problem. So surely you could take a process similar to AMP to prioritise a programme of measures that is integrated and joined up, and give the next programme board a prioritised programme of measures, costed, rather than a long, frankly, wish list.
Yeah, that's exactly where I think we need to go with this, James. You're absolutely spot on as usual. We need to get it down. We need to whittle it down. We need to scope it. We need to perhaps just go for several, not that long list. We might just want to go for one or two, but they need to be costed, because the first thing DEFRA will do is look at them and say this is just like a Christmas wish list, and we've got to go for the most effective ones. So they would have to be evidence-based and they have to be costed out. Councillor Swinglehurst, are you back with us? If not, I was going to...
Well, I have to say I'm coming and going a little bit. I'm going to leave the chairing with you and butt in as I can, because my signal is...
Okay, in which case I think there was a question from Helen Hamilton, if I take that very quickly.
Thanks, Mark. I think actually it's largely been answered. I think I simply wanted to raise the concern that we were being given a very long list of ideas with no, with no information about cost-benefit analysis, how much they would contribute to this.
Yeah.
It seems very late in the day to be throwing out a great long list of ideas.
Yeah, these are ideas that didn't make it onto the action plan that was already been devised because they couldn't be funded. But suddenly we may have an offer of funding, so that's why we've suddenly come to this. I
think it was about. I think it really was about understanding what benefit they would offer, and having a proper sort of analysis before anything's actually presented.
Good. Are there any pressing questions in relation to Jenny's presentation, really, of what the tag was doing and about the timing? I think of, did we all capture the timing of when that tag, when the actual nutrient management plan would be coming back to us? Because I think we're talking about that being delayed until possibly March or April. Is that correct, Jenny?
Yes, I've got an update on that now, but we're looking at for the next board meeting.
Yeah, so the next board meeting would be looking at the next iteration of the nutrient management plan, because what we are trying to do is what was asked at the last board meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, is to actually attribute the phosphate reduction for each entry, and then to put a milestone year of its achievement so that that can be factored in. And then hopefully with the additional things that DEFRA might be able to fund, that might be able to fill the gap. Is my understanding correct, Jenny?
Yes, and there's been some obviously further recent work done by NRW on their report into the Y SAC in Wales and their other special areas of conservation. So that also needs to feed into the revised action plan.
Okay. So was there anything else you wanted to enlighten the board on this item, Jenny, or are you happy to take?
As far as the tag update goes, no, I was just going to quickly talk about the action plan update. Good.
Okay, if you could do that, then that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, this has already been circulated to everybody on the meeting, so you should all have a draft copy of this. It's the River Wye NMP action plan update to the board with today's date on. So what we've done is NRW, Environment Agency and Natural England are continuing to work on the action plan and have formed a working group to get it updated as soon as possible. We're waiting for further information following other reports that have recently come out, including some from NRW that I believe came out yesterday or Friday last week on their SACs. There's some bullet points there looking at what our review of the action plan will achieve, which people can read through. And then, as I mentioned, timeframe, we're looking at early sort of April time. So next board meeting, there should be a revised action plan produced, which will cover the whole of the Y catchment, England and Wales, and will identify actions needed to bring down nutrient levels to the required levels. It's going to be like a one-stop shop that captures all the actions that are required, summarising the current situation, and quantifying the phosphate gap that is there that needs to be removed in order for the SAC to meet compliance. There's an example in the annex of this document just to show a working draft of how the actions will be presented in the revised plan, and they'll be divided into sections on point sources, diffuse sources, catchment scale actions, monitoring, engagement, governance and reporting. So it should be really clear what the action is, what it's addressing, whether that's diffuse source or point source, what scale that is, how it will be monitored, and how that will be reported on further down the line. Again, it mentions funding, so some of the actions will need further funding and might not be possible without additional funding. There's some information on certainty, because when the last action plan was written, which was 2014, we hadn't had the Dutch nitrogen judgment. So the new action plan will include some paragraphs on certainty and explain the implications of the Dutch ruling, and how the certainty needs to be decided, because absolute certainty is not required, but it needs to be have no reasonable scientific doubt on the effects of the measures. And then the action plan will look at all the measures and the actions that it identifies, and look at the certainty of those. Some will be very certain, such as water company infrastructure improvements. If they're guaranteed and they're funded and they're potentially already in place, then obviously they're very certain. Other measures will have less certainty, but they can still be included in the plan, as long as it does explain, the level of certainty there, and how those measures will look to reduce phosphate in the catchment. There's a section on monitoring and quantifying reductions. So it'll look at, can we do any increased monitoring, target the monitoring more effectively, to look at, where we need to, sort of subcatchments where we need to work slightly harder than in others where there's less of an issue with phosphate. And then there's some sections on nutrient neutrality. So it's trying to allow development to proceed while having a plan that will ensure that the SAC targets are met. There's an extract at the end, which is a table, and that just shows how each measure will be set out, and it'll have end dates, notes, the amount of phosphate, where it can be quantified. One issue that there is obviously a lot of the measures, it's really, really difficult to produce a phosphate reduction actual figure. So whether that's because it's hard to quantify or whether there's a lack of certainty because the measures are voluntary, it's quite hard to fill in that phosphate reduction column in some cases. And then there'll be a column at the end, as I mentioned earlier, on certainty and how certain some of the measures are compared to the others. So that's an explanation of what the action plan will be doing. But as I said, there should be a version of it at the next board meeting.
Good, that's really helpful. Thank you, Jenny. There's a lot there. There is the briefing note that you attached, which is embedded in the agenda, does put that all to us all, doesn't it? So if you didn't capture it, it is there. I'm happy to take a few questions on this. Are there any hands up at the moment? I can't see any.
Well, can I raise one, please?
James?
Yeah, Jenny, I couldn't see in the document you shared with us a description of the different regulatory baselines that are in place on either side of the border, nor indeed the prospect of change in the regulatory baseline, particularly in the Welsh side, which is embedded in the agricultural white paper. And then my second point, Jenny, is
I think yeah, I don't know, Jenny Priest, are we able to? I think Councillor Swinglehurst is muted, but it's not working.
Okay, Jenny, my second point was, or question was, have you actually used the MAGIC database or similar to identify all the existing agri-environment measures that are in place now, both Glastier on the Welsh side, catchment sensitive farming, stewardship, etc. on the English side, plus any other EA measures, and got a feel and understanding that you can present to us as to their efficacy or outcomes in terms of P? Until we have that mapped and understood against the base data for where the P problem is the greatest, we're not really going to get a feel for how good was the targeting of the existing agri-environment schemes, how effective they were, are they cost effective? I mean, I know this is potentially a bit embarrassing for the agencies, and I speak as a former agency director, so I share the embarrassment, but I think that data needs to be transparent.
Jenny, is there
Thank
anything
you, James. Yep. Different regulatory baselines. The action plan will have, it has quite a lot of kind of supporting introductory information in it. So there will be information in the final version on what the regulations are. And obviously we have got that issue where they are different. So it will show and have some information in different, you know, comparing England and Wales and what those requirements are. So that will be in there. And then your second query about the MAGIC database, has it been used to map existing schemes? I'm not aware that it has. A lot of those schemes, CSF and countryside stewardship, we see they are Natural England, like more focused on Natural England's remit. So it may be that that is something that we could look into doing and looking at where those are. But I know, you know, there is work that could possibly be done on you know, things like catchment sensitive farming, looking at what has been put in the catchment, because I know the data is collected, you know, for the grant schemes and, you know, what has been delivered. So I have discussed before, you know, if we could get some figures on what's been put in certain catchments and then look at phosphate reductions, we could sort of scale it up and look at how much phosphate should have been removed by some of those, if any of the measures are relevant to reducing phosphate. But as it stands at the moment, unless Natural England or NRW they might have done that separately, but it's not been done for the action plan review. But that's not to say that Natural England might have that information already.
Well, Claire,
do you want me to come in? Do you want me to come in there, Jenny?
Yes, I can't see who that is, sorry.
Yeah, it's Claire.
Yes, go ahead, Claire.
So we don't have that quality of data immediately to hand, James. We've got some good national data on catchment sensitive farming. We've obviously got accessible data on the number of farm visits, the options that are applied for each agri-environment agreements and the number of agri-environment agreements in the catchment. That detail of that translation of those to outcomes in terms of P is a level of detail that we don't have access to, certainly in the local team. I can flag up with our national colleagues and I can take an action away to see what level of data we can get on that. But it's a significant amount of analysis that we certainly don't have to hand at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Claire. That was helpful. Our next questioner might have disappeared. Mary Albright had a question, but I'm not sure if she's still on the call. But I see that Christine Hugh-Jones has got her hand up. Do you want to take this question, Christine?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that it's obviously the regulatory system that's there is very important, but really what we need to know if we're going to look at the effectiveness of all these measures is if the regulations are actually enforced. And the data on this is going to be difficult to obtain. But I mean, I have, for instance, a note from Powys County Council saying that they have never enforced anything about a manure management plan, which has made a planning condition of permissions given for intensive livestock farms. So we do have to ask what is happening as well as what the structure is. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We haven't. I think you're back again, Mary. Did you still want to ask your question, Mary?
Yeah, sorry, Mark, I'm having the same issues as Alyssa, I think. Just a couple of questions for Jenny. I know I'm in the tag, Jenny, so forgive me if they're questions that are obvious anyway.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Mary.
The P reduction figures, as far as I know from all of the meetings we've had over the past, 14 months, without the P reduction, we don't have, so without the figures, we don't have scientific certainty, and the action plan is worthless and the nutrient management plan is worthless. So I don't want to keep being the person that asks, but we need to have numbers to the actions, and the only action with a number or numerical kind of evidence base is wetlands. And we know that the wetlands aren't going to be anywhere near enough to do what we need it to do. So we must have P reduction figures with mathematical evidence bases behind them. Otherwise, Natural England and the EA have told us they will not pass the plan. And without passing the plan, we can't lift the moratorium. So you can see why I'm anxious to get those. The other thing is that we've got all of these actions that are all worthwhile. They're all probably going to have multiple benefits one way or another, but we don't need them all. We only need to make sure that we are scientifically certain of favourable conditions by 2027. So we need to somehow prioritise how we get to that point the quickest way so that, again, the plan is certain. So Natural England must tell us what the gap is between the conditions now and when it tips over to being favourable conditions on a trajectory. I don't mean tomorrow we're going to be favourable, I mean on the trajectory, where do we get to in 2027? Because we're throwing everything at it, but we've still got no kind of place to reach. And just to say that I also agree with James, we've asked many, many times for the information from the catchment sensitive farming, the mid-tier stewardship scheme. And thank you, Nick, for giving us the figures from Farm Herefordshire. A lot of public money has already gone into this. A lot of work has happened on farms. A lot of buildings have been approved by the local authority to try and get us closer to reducing phosphate. But if nobody comes forward with that information, it is worthless. Now, the work has been done, the money has been paid, and the approvals have been granted. We must have it so we can put it into the plan. And all of these things are certainty. They're steps in the right direction. So there seems to be no reason why we should not be using the figures. And without those figures and saying what we did with the money, why would government give us any more? So let's try and not be quite so soft about it anymore. We have to put numbers to the plan. That's what EA and Natural England told us to do. We must do it.
Thank you, Mary. Can I just come back on a couple of those, just with a couple of bits of information? The phosphate reduction figures, you're right, we've got them for wetlands, and obviously we've got them for all of the Dŵr Cymru work. We have also got some figures in a paper that was produced by Farm Herefordshire for the July NMP board meeting. So that did have some figures in around things like on-farm sediment traps. I know there were definitely figures in there. So obviously they can be included in our proposals from TAG. It is the case, unfortunately, that some of the measures, they don't have figures associated with them. We don't have access to figures. So it's not an easy question of we can go away and look in something and come up with figures. We haven't got that information to hand, unfortunately. So I don't know how that will be addressed. But we do have figures for some, but not for all of the measures by any
But
rate.
even if we put in some of the figures and we don't have the P reduction because we never asked for the baseline P, if we know that there was a reduction, we should still put it in there on the basis that it was a good thing that happened and the public money went to the right focus kind of area. We can't keep saying we didn't count the phosphate at the beginning, so we don't know how much phosphate we reduced at the end. Otherwise, it's just all those columns that you and I see every time. They're just empty, and there's hardly any with numbers in. If there's anything we can do, that everybody here must have access to this information, that you know what's going on, you know what you're doing. Simon and Kate have obviously done a lot of work on their maths. I don't think it's excusable anymore for us to say we don't know. And if we don't know and it hasn't got a reduction, get rid of it. Don't keep putting money towards things that we know don't help.
Thank you, Mary. So your second point, well, I think it's probably to do with the first point as well. There will be an update later from the Environment Agency, because we have done some recent work looking at that, what I'd call the phosphate gap, or the amount of phosphate that's exceeding the target, specifically at this stage for the lug. So Andrew Osbaldiston is going to do a quick run through of some work that we've been involved with in the last couple of weeks. So we do have a pretty good idea now of the situation in 2025 after AMP has put in place all of their actions. We do have a figure for how much phosphate per day would have to be removed from the river lug in order for it to stop failing the targets. So we can then look at, once we've got that figure, which we have got, we can then look at, how many of X, different measures will, could be used to remove that amount. So it is progressing. And, it might be that rather than a mixture of loads and loads of different measures, it might be that actually one larger one would be, be the sort of chosen way forward. I don't know, but that's something for further down the line. But yeah, there'll be an update later from Andrew on those figures. So that might provide a bit more clarity as well. So thanks.
Good, thank you. Just to move on, I think, Claire, did you have a hand up?
Yes, I did. I just thought it might be helpful for me to come in and talk a bit about those certainty measures, because I completely understand the frustration around the moratorium. But just to come back to the purpose of this nutrient management plan board, and that's to work towards getting the River Wye into favourable condition, and by 2027, and all the actions that are needed for that is the purpose of the nutrient management plan board. Obviously, the Dutch nitrogen case has intensified our action around those elements that can provide certainty. So that is driven by the case law. It is Natural England's sort of legal advice is that measures that are voluntary, all of which catchment sensitive farming is voluntary, agri-environment schemes are voluntary, will not fulfill that certainty measure. So therefore, investing our time and energy into drilling down to get the exact amounts of money or detail around catchment sensitive farming visits, work that is going ahead and is delivering good outcomes, but drilling down to get the P numbers for that won't help the certainty, because those are voluntary measures, so you can't count them towards nutrient neutrality. So the focus on those measures that can be counted as certain, like the wetlands, we feel is a better use of resource. And just to come back and say the plan is useless. The plan could be used to provide nutrient neutrality across the piece in the way it used to be used, if we can get enough of those certainty actions in the action plan. If not, then the interim measures in place around going for each project, each group of housing, and that having to demonstrate nutrient neutrality is the interim way forward. So there is an interim way forward if the nutrient management plan as a whole can't deliver that level of certainty. So there's those two aspects, but that's why if I thought, Mary, that providing the figures for catchment sensitive farming in terms of the amount of visits or the exact amount of money in each location would provide certainty, we would have done it, but it won't, because it's a voluntary measure, and therefore you can't rely on future uptake in a meaningful way that we feel delivers against the Dutch nitrogen case as it currently stands.
But Claire, I'm talking about actions that have already been taken, not the future actions. I think those should be sidelined, because like you say, they're voluntary and we can't make people do it, and we can't make them deliver the outcome, even if they get the money or the building, whatever it might be. But the past work that you guys have all been doing and supporting, surely that has got some nothing. No,
it can't count. It can't count again as nutrient neutrality, because nutrient neutrality is all about not adding additional phosphate into a failing river. So what's happened previously, what you can't say is we've already removed X amount of phosphate 5 years ago, so we can put that amount back in, because there is no environmental headroom in the lug. It's over its phosphate level. So looking backwards doesn't help with the certainty.
So apart from wetlands and Diaconry's work, then what would you say, from as a Natural England representative, what would you say is the action we need to be looking at?
Well, I think we really need to look at nutrient trading, where, so it's taking out that phosphate, isn't it? So it's looking at examples where they have done that trading of taking out, you know, areas of agriculture that were adding phosphate in, and being able to say, right, that's removed that amount of phosphate. Integrated wetlands are a strong focus. And then I think we do need some more research into looking at other options that could be available that are able to deliver that certainty of future reductions in terms of phosphate. That's where I think, in terms of the certainty work, that we need to focus our effort.
Really, we've got wetlands, we've got the sewage treatment works, we've got destocking, and we've got trading of phosphate. So those are the 4 things that Natural England think are our best way of getting out of this by 2027.
I think there's a huge amount of work to get out of this by 2027. I think those are the measures that would provide the most certainty in terms of allowing development to happen, because that element of certainty in the Dutch nitrogen case is about allowing that, proceeding with that development. Alongside that, there's a huge piece of work about improving river condition, about storing carbon, about improving our biodiversity, about making sure the river thrives, that we still need to do. And that's where all the measures, all the voluntary measures, all the work that Farm Herefordshire are doing, that YNS are doing, that continued, that we've got to build momentum on, and look for more options too. We need to do both of them.
Good. I'm just going to try and move this on a bit, because we've got a couple more questions and I'm conscious of time. Simon, you have had your hand up for a while as well.
Just to say, I've been listening to this conversation with interest, and a lot of it is in the YNS Foundation's report, which I will wait to give.
Okay, good. That was quick. Jim, you had your hand up, and no, you haven't. Have you? Has it passed?
Thank you, Mark. I think it's sort of been answered by Mary's follow-up, so I'll let you carry on.
Good. Okay. I can't see any other hands up. I'm wondering, we're about an hour and a half in. Would we like to take a 5-minute comfort break? Would that be useful? Yeah. Should we say 5 minutes?
What do you think the timeline's now for finishing this meeting, Mark?
Well, we've got scheduled till 5.
Okay, that's great. Fine.
So that's what I'm thinking about. Simon, do you want to come in? You're going to ask for 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's raining very hard outside now, and my broadband doesn't hold up. So what I will do is I'll pop an email to Kate in the event that I do get cut off for the YNS Foundation report.
Okay, well, let's take 5 out now. So my computer says 5:35. So if we could aim 15:40, just enough time.
Lady hasn't spoken, but isn't speaking, but it's saying it's streaming live on the.
Is it streaming live now? Okay, well, look.
Right.
Good. Thank you, everybody, for returning. I hope we've all managed to return and made ourselves a cup of tea. There was some interesting sixth form common room chat going on, which was I'm sure we can pick up some of those questions and answers when we're able to under the next agenda items, if not under AOB. But it was fascinating, actually, hearing some of the questions between everybody. It's very entertaining for me. So the next agenda item is one relating to the NRW guidance. Unless things have changed, I don't believe we've got NRW here, but we may have Powys Council with us still, hopefully. Have we still got Peter with us from Powys Council?
Yes, I'm here, Mark. Yeah, hello all.
do you want to try and take us through your understanding of this? Because I think it's yourselves and Brecon Beacons National Park, perhaps. So perhaps Peter, if you start, and then Tracy, perhaps you could, from Brecon Beacons, let us know what your thoughts are on it. But we won't obviously be able to speak to NRW, will we? So Peter, could we start with you? And sorry, before you start, just to let everyone know, if you haven't caught it already, under item 5, embedded are lots of PDF documents, which essentially were released on about the 17th or 18th of December by NRW. And that's what we're talking about now. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, well, 17th of December, yes, we have received various documents from NRW relating to the release of their evidence base in relation to the River Wye. I think in short, what it did was conclude that 33% of the water bodies within the Wye catchment were passing phosphate water quality standards, but the remainder various degrees of failure. That's all set out. It's been published on NRW's website, so it's there publicly available. At the same time as planning authorities, ourselves, Powys County Council, Brecon Beacons National Park, and Monmouthshire County Council were also provided with interim planning guidance, which has been prepared by NRW. Now, NRW have offered to us to work with us on the development of that interim planning guidance, so we're waiting to do that. In terms of what it means, the sort of immediate implications for us is it affects live planning applications within the whole of the Wye catchment across Powys, and that includes the Lug catchment. I've sought clarification from NRW because when you compare the evidence base with the catchment, there do seem to be some holes within the evidence base versus the catchment. So the Lug around Prestine was one of those. So we've obtained clarification on that, and it is catchment wide. So there's implications for current applications that we have in with us at the moment. I'm sure this is all very familiar to colleagues in Herefordshire in terms of how they responded to similar letters in the past. So we're having to review those applications at the moment. Some will require additional assessments under the HRA to assess their phosphate generation. So, and again, it's similar language used around neutrality. It matches Natural England's advice and the Dutch nitrate judgment. I think there probably are some differences of approach between what we've received from NRW and what Natural England have presented in terms of public sewered areas, and there's probably further discussion warranted there. I think the only other updates I can really give at the moment is Tracy myself, Tracy's on the call as well, along with colleagues from Monmouthshire, along with the Cymru, Welsh Water. We met with Welsh Government colleagues yesterday. Unfortunately, NRW colleagues couldn't make yesterday either. I think they've got a power outage at the moment, but I know they're also in the process of about to release publicly the evidence for the other 8 river sacks across Wales. So I think that's probably demanding their attention as well at the moment. Now, I don't know if they've given that apology directly to you, Mark, but I suspect there's some of that behind it. So I think I'm really with Tracy. If I missed any, can I ask Tracy sort of direct, have I missed anything, Tracy, that you would like to raise as well, please?
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, thank you, Mark. Yeah, I mean, Peter summed it up really well. We have had a meeting yesterday with colleagues in Powys and Monmouthshire, and I think we've determined that the heads of planning are going to write to NRW because we do need some clarification on some of the matters that they've issued. For example, PD rights for household development. We're taking the precautionary approach to existing applications, and that we're screening everything within the limits of the catchment and the guidance that was issued. But obviously there are implications for that and for people development going forward. I mean, for ourselves in Monmouthshire, it's not just existing planning applications and future planning applications. We are at a point of preferred strategy with our local development plan. So it is exercising our minds in regard to that, and also to our National Park Management Plan replacement. So we need ongoing discussions, and as Pete alluded to, with Welsh Government about that. So no, I think that's about it. I think you've covered everything else, Peter. Thank you.
I see a question in the chat just around the interim planning advice. That's a query we've got with NRW. We've received it, but it's not published on NRW's website. So I'm seeking clarity as to when it will be published.
Okay.
Mark, if I could
sorry, James.
Sorry, just finish with Peter and Tracy first, and then we can go into some questions on it. Tracy, I think you still wanted to come back in, did you?
Yeah, sorry, it was just a point. My apologies, Mark and James, for that interruption. But we also met with Dura Cymru, their forward planning team, yesterday, and there is only one water treatment plant on the Usk at Talgarth that has phosphate stripping in it. So obviously that's an issue. Thank you.
Plus Llandrindod we have as well. I know we've got, was it Fergus on the call as well? There's obviously further investment plans afoot. We've got starter improvement works in Norton, for instance, at the moment near Prestine.
Sure, it might be just useful just to take a quick question, sorry, from Fergus, because I think it's probably coming in just to re-establish this.
Just to establish, we've got phosphorus removal now on Llandrindod Wells, Leominster, Ain and Rotherwas already works. And we are installing, I know I'm going to go into this a bit more, we're tightening up the phosphorus removal standards on those 4 sites. And then there's another 7 sites that will have phosphorus removal on them over and above.
Yeah.
Good, okay. And on the Lug catchment, I think you're talking of Prestine and Norton, aren't you, Fergus?
We're looking at, on the Lug, there is Norton, Prestine, Leominster and Wubley.
Yeah, so Leominster and Webley are in England. The two, I suppose, for the NRW guidance we're particularly interested in. Norton, I think, is coming through on December 21, isn't it? And the Prestine's 2025, I think, in your AMP from memory.
It'll be whatever is in our AMP programme.
Okay, good, thank you. James, I think you wanted to come in then, please.
Just to add to what Tracy very helpfully set out, we were expecting the advice from NRW on the Usk and all the other SAC rivers today. Unless Tracy corrects me, I'm not aware that we've had it, but we are expecting it this week. So that's to watch. We will be briefing members in the Brecon Beacons National Park on Friday at our policy forum, and again at planning committee next Tuesday. And on Friday, we will be meeting with Faye Jones MP to have a further discussion with her, following up the discussion we had with the 3 MPs cross-border on the 8th, Mark.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so I mean, if I may say, if I could just put something here, but we haven't got NRW. We've obviously been reading the advice for the planning teams in Wales and comparing that with our own, and there does seem to be quite a lot of difference between the two. As I've mentioned at some of our cross-border meetings the other day, it would appear that so long as a sewage treatment works has got the capacity to handle new development and also has the conditions, by that I guess that means phosphate stripping in place, it would not object, NRW would not object, it would seem, to new development. So that would be very different to, say, in Leominster, where you're actually going to improve the stripping down because you're going to improve it to 100%, I think, and there is certainly capacity there. Yet we would be resisting one house in Leominster, but yet say in 2021 in Norton you could have a housing estate built just upstream a few miles over the border. That doesn't seem to be exactly, that doesn't seem to me to see what the Dutch judgment's saying, because phosphate stripping won't be taken out 100%, and it also means that the headroom coming into England is that much removed. Is that also the understanding of particularly Fergus? I don't know if you've got a view on that, because I suppose Welsh Water are going to be, if you've got Norton coming online in December this year, I guess there could be some Grampian conditions coming forward from Powys Council in relation to development, because they know it's going to happen.
That could be the case. I don't have the specifics for each one, Mark, but in general, where we have a permit with capacity in the permit and capacity physically on the plant, we won't object to development. We can't object to development. If we do have limitations, as I think has been explained sort of in other meetings, we will then advise or sort of recommend Grampian conditions to allow us to develop the capacity on those sites.
Good. So that would be the Welsh Water's response, but also there'd be NRW's potential response to any habitat risk assessment, appropriate assessment undertaken. My understanding is there wouldn't be an objection, for an example, for either Prestine or Norton if there was capacity and then there was actual stripping in place. Just before I go to the questions, the other thing that I would just point out from the English side of the border's understanding of it is for private treatment systems. Likewise, whereas there's 5 bullet points that have to be met in our position statement involving groundwater levels, hydrology, and all those sorts of things which can affect a septic tank or package treatment plant operation. It would appear that in the Welsh version, it just has to be 50 meters away from the SAC. So if it's 50 meters away, for example, 51 meters away from the River Lug, but adjacent to a ditch that's going straight into it, our understanding is NRW would not resist to it, which again is very different to what's happening in England, and will allow any development to come through on private drainage, so long as it's not going straight within 50 meters of the actual River Lug. So that again seems to be different to what the Dutch judgment would be saying.
I was going to say, Mark, I think that's what the guidance says at the moment. It is interim. I think there will be points and discussion to be made around that. I think the other responsibility that we as authorities have is the competent authority responsibility of the habitat regs. So we're still going to have to get things through HRA and appropriate assessment and think about pathways to the SAC. So there's still that has to be met as well.
Absolutely. So a lot of these package treatment plants will have a permit to discharge straight into a brook that goes 51 meters into the River Lug. So I suppose our point is that English authorities won't have a chance to comment necessarily on this guidance, but you will, and that's certainly our thinking. It's not that we're wishing to prohibit and stop development in Powys. I think it's just we're looking for consistency in the catchment.
I think there may be a discussion there to be had. And again, it's around the relevant organisations coming together. I'm not NRW, but I would be strongly encouraging that to come together and trying to see if we can be consistent. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
Mark, is Kevin Bishop. We had this discussion at the TAG last week, and Natural England confirmed that they were going to have discussions with NRW to create a level playing field on this matter.
Yeah. There's other things, aren't there, such as the difference in the water quality level on the Monmouth side of the lower Wye as opposed to on the eastern side, Forest of Dean. So you've got one river with two different targets, which is bonkers to me unless there's no mixing of the water. Let's take some questions on this, please. Tom, I think you were first up and then Kate second. If I take a question from you, please. Tom Tibbetts.
Go on with Kate, please.
All right, Kate, can we hear what your question is, please, on this?
Yeah, it's a question probably for Natural England. In terms of the new NRW data reviews indicating SAC failures, what is the implication based on the lower Wye now failing for the rest of the catchment upstream?
So can you Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Off on mute. So just to take one step back, just in terms of to update you, I've had a number of conversations with Anne Weedy in NRW about that difference in guidance. So those conversations are happening. I can't speak for NRW and I won't, but we've talked through our approach around permitted headroom and environmental headroom in detail with NRW. So just to let you know that those conversations are happening and I suspect ongoing. In terms of the targets, Kate, again, we've looked at the work that NRW have done, both on the targets in terms of the way those targets have been set and their approach in terms of how they've looked at how they've ascertained those figures. So the targets in England were set as part of the second round of River Basin Management Planning, round 2. We're now in River Basin Management Planning round 3. So we are in discussions with the Environment Agency, and we will be to relook at those targets as part of the River Basin Management Planning round 3. So that will happen in light of that. Obviously, NRW have just recently done theirs, and we also do need a further conversation with NRW because we use, as you know, we use a 3-year rolling approach in terms of P numbers, but there does appear to be some differences in NRW and our data. So we just need a further detailed conversation with NRW to look into detail of that, and we will be following that up with NRW.
Thank you, Claire. Right, Tom, did you want to come in, or is your moment past now?
No, I can come in. I just I think it was at the last Nutrient Management Board meeting I attended, or maybe the one before, where either NRW or Paris County Council said that they couldn't identify pathways from which phosphate contained in manure would find its way into the river SAC. I was just wondering if over the last few months they've managed to come up with any obvious pathways such as the land.
We haven't got NRW on the call, but is anybody else able to answer that question?
Well, if you read NRW's press release and website, they have said there's no direct connection, for instance, between intensive livestock units and increasing phosphate levels on the river. That is what the evidence has indicated to them. I think that there are pathways, there will be pathways there. It's ensuring that certainly when we have planning applications, that's what we're looking for, trying to make sure that manure, for instance, isn't spread where it can be run off or run off fields, for example, into the SAC or into a watercourse that eventually leads to a SAC. So that is being looked at through the HRA processes at the moment.
Oh, thank you, Peter.
Sorry, so Alyssa here. Peter, are you able to look at that outside of the red line of a planning application?
You're going to stump me on a technicality. If we've got manure management, but if you've got manure management plans coming in for intensive livestock units, yes, we're looking at that.
Okay, this is something that's always puzzled me. You could say, well, it's not what they're saying is that there is no evidence to say that there is a direct link, and I haven't seen any evidence to say that there isn't. So at the moment,
yeah,
I don't really know. But definitely in terms of manure, then might be going out into, as it were, the wider world. And do we actually know then where that is going and what's happening to it, and whether or not it's that manure that might be causing some of the problem? And is there any evidence it isn't? That would be one thing that I know it's not really one for you, Peter. It's NRW. It's a terrible shame that they're not here. The other thing is, I picked up Bob Vaughan from NRW, who, when asked what they were going to do to decrease the phosphate, said that they were going to retrofit a lot of those sites, quote unquote. I'm not entirely certain what that meant. Which sites and in what manner are they going to retrofit what sites, given that apparently the problem isn't coming from the chicken farms? Can you shed any light on that?
I missed, sorry, Alyssa, Chair, I missed the first part. Who said what? Sorry. Who said
Bob
that?
Vaughan. Bob Vaughan from NRW. In an interview, he was asked what they were going to do to decrease the phosphorus.
Right. I'm honestly, yeah, that's a new one on me.
They're going to retrofit a lot of these sites, but he didn't elaborate. And
again, I'm not NRW. I wish, and I just don't know what it means. Sorry.
No.
I think. Sorry. First of all, do you want to take back the chair, Councillor Swinglehurst, or shall we go as we're doing at the moment? And
You're doing a fantastic job, Mr. Wilmot.
Not as good as you. Not as good as you.
My internet's still a bit fritzy.
Right, exactly. So I think I'm going to take questions out of order here because I think Simon can answer that last question, and I know he's got his hand up because he's doing some lot of work on retrofitting of some of the egg rearing establishments, as I understand. Is that right?
Yes, I'm after meeting with the ministers for housing and for agriculture in Wales, and with the Welsh Government's water quality minister, our water minister. We are putting together a proposal to do exactly this, working through the agri supply chain to see where we can use Welsh Government money to retrofit. The nice thing is that the Welsh Government have taken a certain degree of ownership of the issue. The other thing that I just wanted to raise is there was a conversation earlier about phosphate, and we have to be very careful when we use the term phosphate. There are 3 different forms of phosphate in the environment. You've got soluble reactive phosphate, which is the one that is commonly monitored by statutory bodies. You've got dissolved organic phosphate, which is the one that is generally generated by manures. And you've got total phosphate, which includes the particulate phosphate. The water companies measure in total phosphorus, so that they're taking the whole fraction, whereas the statutory bodies are measuring soluble reactive phosphate. What I will give more reports, I'll give a report in more depth about this in my report, but when we are looking at the ecology of the river, which is the baseline that we're trying to improve here, we need to include the dissolved organic fraction as well, because a lot of the algal species can use that as well.
Good. Okay, I'm conscious we've got to move this on if we're going to try to finish at the scheduled time. So if we could be quick, I think we'll take a question in from Helen Hamilton and one more from Tom. See where that takes us. So Helen.
Yes, I want to go back to this issue of NRW's approach to packaged treatment plants and the sewage treatment plants. And it is an issue I've raised about the Natural England position statement, which is that there appears to me to be a conflict with paragraph 183 of the NPPF, in that I think NRW is recognising that the sewage treatment plants and packaged treatment plants are subject to environmental permitting, or in the case of packaged treatment plants, the binding rules. I asked Natural England why it would allow packaged treatment plants under the binding rules without habitats regulations assessment, and the answer was that there had been an overall habitat regulations assessment done, which showed that the binding rules were sufficient to give certainty that, provided packaged treatment plants complied with them, that they posed no risk to water quality. So it seems quite perverse, actually, for the position statement to have so much focus on packaged treatment plants, when there is nothing that I can see in the apportionment data that suggests that these are actually a problem, and they are regulated by the Environment Agency. And similarly, the sewage treatment plants are regulated by the Environment Agency. And if the planning authority is duplicating the role of the Environment Agency in deciding that planning permissions can't be approved where they're going to a sewage treatment plant that has headroom, provided it's, and is remaining within its environmental permit, I think I think there's a risk that that the planning authority is trying to, contrary to 183 and sort of the planning law, duplicate the role of the permitting authorities, and that is why I assumed that NRW has taken this approach in its planning guidance.
Okay, thank you. There's nobody obviously from NRW here to answer you on that, but that's certainly noted by all. A quick question from Tom, please. We do need to move this on.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be quick. I just want to go back to pathways, and the reason this is important is because in Natural Resources Wales's interim advice to the Powys County Council on planning applications within the Wye catchment, it says in paragraph 2 of the document, with no pathway for impacts, the development can be screened out as not likely to have a significant effect on the SAC in relation to phosphate inputs. So therefore, if the Planning Authority and Natural Resources Wales continues to deny that there is a pathway between spreading manure which contains phosphate on the land and that phosphate running off into the river, if that is still the position that the authorities are taking, then it would appear that this planning advice gives the green light to any proposal which proposes to spread manure on the land. And and it does go on to say the following types of development are unlikely to increase phosphate inputs, and it lists 6 types of developments, all in relation to connections to wastewater and the sewage network, which we've discussed, but none acknowledging the pathway of manure spreading. I think that is a really important point not to lose.
And I'm sure that colleagues on this call, like Powys and Brecon Beacons, have the ability to understand that. And I know that I've also questioned why IPUs aren't considered to be directly linked. And Peter Morris did mention that as well. I know when I asked that question at a Refocus seminar, I think poultry manure was considered to be a very big part of the problem, I suppose, for phosphates in the Wye catchment. So all these things do need to be answered. I see that Christine Hugh-Jones has had her hand up. It would help actually, at the bottom there's a reaction button and you can raise a yellow hand. So if I take a quick question from Christine, and then our real chair wants to come in. I haven't forgotten that because she's using a yellow hand, that we now can use that even though we're co-hosts. So Christine and then Councillor Swinglehurst, please.
I did want to emphasise this mechanistic pathways idea even more, because surely the rain falls on the land and then it either runs off the land above the surface or below the surface through the soil or through land drains or wormholes or whatever. But in the end, it all ends up in the rivers. We know there's a connection between rain and the rivers. So how doesn't it affect manure spreading? I just can't understand it.
No, and I think a lot of people share that concern as well. And I think, I forget which person it was, but there is, I think, some advice being issued, isn't there, from NRW on their thinking behind how they got to that. And obviously, if other local planning authorities are having a chance to question this with NRW directly, that would be a way that no doubt they'll take this on board. Councillor Swinglehurst.
I was just going to suggest, since this is a lot of questions have come up now for NRW who are clearly not present in the meeting, that the board asks NRW or representative to listen to the recording of this meeting and to pick up those points and those questions and give us written responses.
I think that's an excellent idea. If you also want to put questions in the chat, I will cut and paste it at the end of the call, so we will pick that all up. So please put any questions there as well, so we can get them. I'm conscious that we should be moving on because we've got a number of things still to talk about, although I'll try to be brief on them. But I think that's probably all that we can do at the moment on NRW and Powys on that, on the guidance. I mean, so it's good that we obviously got some guidance now, but it's probably just the finer detail, and that may well come through. Point 6, the item 6, if Councillor Swinglehurst is able with her connection to take us through this one, that'd be useful. It was just really an update on the various English and Welsh liaison meetings we've had with the agencies. It included Herefordshire Council, Parish Council, Brecon Beacons, Avara, who are the broiler production company, H. Kilg, who are the housing group, and our MPs. Councillor Swinglehurst, are you able to?
Thank you, Mr. Swingle. And I will be brief. So there have been a series of meetings, partly, I think, to arrive at a shared understanding that there are always two elements to the work that we do. One is certainty and doing what we can to arrive at the point so that the development work can continue in the north of the county that's been halted for such a long time. And the other is the bigger, broader picture, which is the issue of water quality. And I think it's really important that we try to get a shared understanding across the borders and, as it were, up and down the tiers of local and central government. And I feel that these meetings have been successful. We've also had, I think, some positive engagement with the supply chain companies who would wish to associate themselves with good practice, and signalled a willingness to work with us on that. And we're very grateful to I think the work that WASC Foundation are doing in that respect as well. There's some good kind of positive stuff potentially coming out of that. And then finally, the meeting I had most recently, which were all the MPs, that there was, I felt, a determination to try to bring to bear what support they can with DEFRA to support us, to enable us in the plan to unlock the situation. So where there is an obstacle, which is one of funding and resource, then we were asked to come up with a kind of a digest of those elements of the plan, or those actions that would bring about improvement in the reasonably short to medium term. But we have a relatively narrow window to come up with that. But that felt like a positive outcome. So I think that there's a growing understanding of the need to be dynamic, the need to the sense of urgency around this subject, and we look to all of our partners really to pick up on that.
Good, thank you, Councillor Swinglehurst. Yeah, that's certainly, I think, since the last meeting in the end of September, I think that was that point we took an action to meet with the MPs, and now we're meeting with all three. So that's Jessie Norman, South Herefordshire, Bill Wiggin, North Herefordshire, and Faye Jones, who's for Powys. And I think they've been very useful meetings involving with the food industry and everything. And so you've got that eureka moment, I think, at the last meeting. Thank you.
And it's also being anticipated that we will now be talking as well across to Monmouthshire.
Indeed, we just need to get that established, those links, I think, which I know that Liz W, who's on the call, has been trying to find a way that we can talk to these two local authorities.
That was at the MP level. The MPs was going
to... The MP, yeah, it'll be different. It won't be Jessie, will it? It'll be somebody else.
David Davies.
David Davies, is it? Okay, Monmouthshire and the Forest of Dean side. Maybe
Mark
somebody
Harper,
else.
question mark?
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway.
Okay, so so I see in the chat there's some questions there about the political context from Councillor Milne, who's one of Herefordshire councillors and the like, and obviously there was that private member's bill reading about combined sewage overflows the other day, which arguably are part of the problem, although that's more in flood. But all these things all will be considered, I suppose, in the tag. So thank you for that. I see we've got a question from Councillor Chowns.
Thanks. Sorry, I've been keeping quiet because I'm only an observer on this meeting, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave at 4:30. And just what Alyssa was saying about the meeting with MPs, just a couple of reflections on that. One of my takeaways from that meeting was that there is still insufficient recognition of the importance of tackling the agricultural pollution side of this. And I confess I feel that from this meeting today as well. I think that nettle needs to be grasped harder. The other thing that I took away from that meeting with the MPs was that a very strong message from them that they were pushing back against a request from us for more political help, saying that when there is a comprehensive plan, then we'll help. And some of the conversations that were had earlier today regarding the need for quantification of proposals and real kind of clarity about exactly, you know, who, what, when, where, why, how much. I think until we have that, we're going to struggle. And so I really feel that I suppose I request this board to come up with that very clear plan as quickly as humanly possible.
Yeah.
And I also think that, you know, one of the points that I made in the meeting last week was that not all stakeholders can have this both ways. can ask for the kind of rapid removal of the moratorium and at the same time refuse any efforts to tackle the agricultural side of the pollution equation. And I really feel that that second side needs grasping harder.
Okay, I think this concerns shared by many board members. Councillor Townsend, well put. Unless there are any further questions on this, should we move on then to the next item, which I think
Oh yes, let's.
is probably yours again, Councillor Swinglehurst, because I know that you asked the TAG to consider it, and I did raise it on your behalf at the TAG. But so if you want to introduce this, and we'll see perhaps what, because we've only got Environment Agency, not NRW. But
okay, no, that's fine. And I think I'll thank Councillor Chance, because actually her intervention at that point, he could not have teed this up more perfectly if we'd been trying. So thank you very much. So the water protection zone option is something that was in the first iteration of the plan. It was sort of briefly out, now it's back in. It's a you know, potentially a longish journey, but we have to start somewhere. And what brings me back to it, and I completely understand, you know, off the bat, I know that there will be members of the board who are not fans of this as an option. But we're roughly at halfway point from when the board started to when we're supposed to reach good ecological status or favourable conservation status, and we're not there, and we so far haven't got certainty. The work of Refocus has opened up a level of conversation that is really quite challenging to our modelling and our understanding of the situation, and whether or not the regulatory provision that is in place is enough, is appropriate to that challenge. And I think that there would be nothing to be lost in framing doing some scoping work and moving towards a business case to take into account the economic and environmental costs of both doing and not doing taking the steps towards a water protection zone. I'm not suggesting that we do it. I'm suggesting that we start to consider it and scope it and do that level of work that will give us the detailed understanding and start to make a case. And that's what I think, because I think, you know, the points around agricultural diffuse are well made by those people who've been in this meeting, and I think we're struggling with the regulatory flaw that appears not to do what it needs to do currently, and so one has to respond to that. We can't just keep on failing to grasp the nettle, as Councillor Chowns put it. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you. Because the Water Protection Zone, it's obviously a piece of legislation under the 1991 Water Resources Act, which gives the power to the Environment Agency, or NRW, to put forward should we go that way. I don't know, Jenny Gamble or Andrew Osbaldeston, if you wish to comment on that, because we haven't got NRW here.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree, Mark, with the comments that Alyssa has just made. I think any new bit of legislation or water protection zone, it doesn't want to duplicate something that's already there in terms of our existing regulations, and it needs to, you know, complement other measures as well. So a business case that sets out, you know, the pros and the cons, I think, is probably something that's very well worth doing at the current you know, at the current time. So yeah, I think the other thing to bear in mind also, it's the sort of how the new ELMS system will play into this as well, in terms of, you know, targeting or putting measures in place that provide public good, you know, and they need to be targeted accordingly. So that's the other thing to obviously to bring in there as well. But yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a good thing to consider. I don't know, Jenny, do you want to add anything?
I don't have much to add to that, Andrew. I think part of the work around putting a case together for a water protection zone, you have to give a really good evidence base and show how it would be above and beyond the current regulations. So if you've got current regulations that can achieve the result that you want, obviously you need to use those first. And it might be that if there's a resource issue around the current regulations, then it would be potentially an option to address the resource issue and use current regulations rather than going down the water protection zone route. But that's something that would go in the case, I suppose, that it would, if we've got existing regulations that are potentially adequate, but they're just not doing their job because of resourcing, then it might be that was looked at as a preferable solution to a water protection zone. But I do appreciate Alyssa was saying, there is a time, it does take a long time for a water protection zone to be established. And I know there's a concern that if it's left too late to even get the ball rolling on that the kind of time would have been and gone. Whereas if the process maybe got looked at in a bit more detail now, then it could work in parallel with all the other things that are going on, and we can put the case together for more resources to address the existing regulations.
Good.
So yeah, that's my thoughts really.
Okay, no, thank you. And I think Councillor Swinglehurst recognises that, and I think it's just a request to keep it on the table, because these things can take a long time. But if you have that on the table, then it does focus minds, and potentially DEFRA might do other things such as resource areas, which perhaps could come to some solution there. So just to balance this, can we, Sarah, can you, from an FU perspective, can we hear your views, please?
Yeah. I think the concern I have is that, obviously, listening to the discussion this afternoon and looking at the comments on the chat, there's a lot of commentary there about the fact that the existing regulatory system that we've got isn't working. What we have is a fairly new piece of legislation with the Farming Rules for Water, which came in 2018. It came in as a fairly sort of soft launch from Environment Agency, they didn't go out, they did a lot of awareness raising, but they didn't go out there and look at regulating that piece of legislation. But my understanding of that from Andrew and from Jenny is that has now changed. Environment Agency have written to farmers within the Lug catchment in particular to talk to them about Farming Rules for Water and what that means. And some of the comments about Farming Rules for Water only picking up extreme cases are just not accurate. If you look at the rules, and you look at what is required in terms of field applications, they are very strict, and they ask you to make an assessment of your phosphate. They ask you to take consideration of your indices before you make decisions about applying additional nutrients. So it's all the issues that we've talked about through Refocus. They are all addressed within that Farming Rules for Water, but it is very recent. So I think for people who are saying that the regulatory framework that we have is not working, I think they're jumping the gun. So I think Jenny is right. I support what she's saying. If you are looking at putting up an additional regulatory system, how would that be different to Farming Rules for Water would be my question, because Farming Rules for Water is aimed at tackling phosphate pollution. It's been brought together with a lot of dialogue with agricultural organisations, and I think we could do with perhaps a presentation from Environment Agency about the current rules, about the current revisions to the rules, which there's a consultation at the moment, and what that means for the catchment. I think that's probably what we need to look at, rather than a WPZ, because as an organisation, we wouldn't be supportive of a WPZ because we do have the regulatory tools in the box within England. Obviously, I don't know what the situation is in Wales.
I don't see that there's any reason that these things can't exist in parallel, though. I don't see it as an either or. I mean, we would all love the 2018 rules to do the job and to somehow deal with legacy phosphates and ploughing and all the rest of it. I'm not sure that they would, but I mean, if they can, great. But there's nothing. We aren't expecting them the EA to stop enforcing the 2018 rules because we're going to start looking at a WPZ. It can all happen at the same time, surely.
The point The point that I'm making, though, is that you need to have evidence that the current regulatory system doesn't work before you can go to a WPZ, and we don't have that.
Well, that's the purpose of taking this kind of initial step to start to scope that. So, you know.
No, that's really good points made by both, and I suppose for my part, just my understanding of a WPZ, I totally get what the water protection zone, the farming rules 2018 do, and about requiring fields to be analysed every 5 years, I think it is, and an agronomist to look at that. But you wouldn't get 10-metre buffer strips through that legislation. You wouldn't perhaps get any control over which fields are too sensitive to actually do certain sorts of farming practices on and applying manure to. For example, if they immediately butted up to the River Lug, it's things like that that would be worth considering and understanding what the scientists with evidence have to say with that. But of course, with a water protection zone, I totally understand, or officers do, and I'm sure members, that you have to look at the impact upon the economy and the community and the farming community and the like. So it's a very difficult one. So with that, because let's just quickly go to James. James, you've had your hand up for a while, and then Helen afterwards.
Thank you. I applaud Alyssa's ambition, Mark. However, WPZ, there's a very high bar set to achieve that, Alyssa. And as others have said, it will require a great deal of evidence gathering. It would require the sort of work we talked about an hour and a half ago in terms of establishing a coherent and integrated programme of measures, costed, targeted, against the sorts of things that Mark has alluded to, the buffer strips, the fields that are too sensitive to plough, arable reversion. In addition, it would require some understanding of why voluntary measures aren't working. And that takes me back to the targeting of existing agri-environment measures. If agri-environment measures through CSF and stewardship are targeted at these issues, they will have an effect. The problem is they're not targeted because, quite rightly, Natural England has other priorities. There is a resource equation, there is a resource envelope. We would need to demonstrate that all of those things have been done. Otherwise, and I go back to Ellie's point, we will not have the support of our local MPs. Those of us who were in that meeting a couple of weeks ago, it was pretty clear that two of the MPs were not supporting really any action, and one other would only support it if, as Mark said, there was this coherent piece of work from the bottom up before that individual would support an approach to DEFRA. So I think a WPZ, for the reasons that both Jenny and our colleague from the NFU have said, is a very tall and long shot, and it has a very high bar set against it. So I want to urge a cautionary note. A lot of work needs to be done before we get to that place.
It would. There's only one elsewhere in the UK that's with a D, and by comparison, I think it's a much simpler kind of version in that it restricts what things can be stored adjacent to the D to protect its water quality for abstraction for drinking, I believe. Whereas here, this would be a totally different game whatsoever. So it would be very, very complex, very innovative. But then again, it is a tool in the box, and I think that's the point of Councillor Swinglehurst. So the next person, sorry, who did I call next? I've forgotten. I'm sure there was somebody else who also had their hand up. No, it's Helen. Yeah, Helen.
It was me, but I thought
that's why you confused me. The hand went down and it came up again.
It did. Because I'm conscious that we probably want to hear what Simon Evans has to say, because he's putting notes in the chat saying it's in his update. But I mean, I can understand what you're saying about it being a high bar, but I do think that it is something that we need to keep on the table, and we need to maybe look at what evidence we would have to be pulling together and be doing that in parallel to all of these other things. Because as James said earlier, you know, James and I raised all of these issues and a lot of the solutions to this in 1995 when we notified the rivers, and here we still are saying, why isn't this working? And the fact of the matter is that it's because most of it is voluntary. And, you know, what we need is something that actually, you know, has a requirement and has monitoring and enforcement and teeth.
Thank you, that's really useful. I think when we do the update from WAF, I think Simon's probably going to update us, but just again to balance it, Helen, do you want to come in from CLA just so we can understand where your thinking is?
I think, I mean, it's just kind of picking up on Sarah's point. It seems like a lot of us are commenting on water protection zones without perhaps really understanding what the farming rules for water will and won't do. And I just wonder if we could have more information, presentation maybe from the EA at the next meeting on what those are. But certainly, you know, before we would be able to consider supporting the water protection zone, we would want to know that what can be achieved within the existing regulations, and we want to understand that a lot more clearly. So I think that's a really valuable piece of work, but certainly at this stage, I think we're a long way away from considering water protection zone.
Okay, I think that's a good point, and it can wait to the next board meeting, which is probably going to be April, or it could be something that could happen sooner. We haven't got NRW on the call, who would also be involved in this, but Jenny or Andrew, is that something that we could give to you as an action for the next meeting?
Yeah, that we could put something together on farming rules, definitely.
I think there's an understanding of it. I think, as you know, again, taking up the point of both Helen and Sarah, the very fact that I think there was a slow start to the enforcement of it, and I know the reasons for that from Dave Throop and the conversations. We probably haven't seen the teeth of it really cutting in until the letter drop in about October, just gone. Which perhaps is a shame because we've wasted perhaps a year or so, but I can understand how you've allowed that to bed in. Sorry, Andrew, were you trying to come back in?
Sorry, yeah. I think there's two things to make farming rules for water work. One is the level of resources we need to raise that awareness with farmers about the regulations in the first place, because that still isn't there, and more work needs to be done there. And the second one, of course, is the level of resources to actually regulate the compliance, and we haven't been given that resource. I'll come on to it a bit later, but to do that, we are doing it. We've made some good headways with that, but the resources are the things that can be needed for that.
Right, that's a point well made. It was the top of my wish list for the DEFRA funding, actually, to ring fence fund the Environment Agency. But there you are. Should we move on, please, on the agenda, because I'm conscious we've got about 25 minutes left and we've got some things to deal with. The Citizen Science Project, Councillor Swinglehurst wanted that on there as well. I think that was because of correspondence, Andrew, between you and possibly Tom, who's also on the call. Councillor Swinglehurst, would you like to introduce that?
Well, I think I'm really quite excited about the Citizen Science Project. I think it's a really, really interesting development. So Andrew, I'm going to ask you to lead on this, but I would also like to hear from Tom Tibbetts and also from Andrew McRobb on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. So an ask was made for some funding actually to support citizen science going forward. We've been able to get some money to kickstart some of this work, which is great. And we're very grateful also for the opportunity to do this and support from our communities, because like you say, Lisa, it's a really important bit of work, and we've got our statutory water quality monitoring we do on the rivers, on the river network, and that is obviously under pressure as well. And the citizen science monitoring, it will provide some really useful data, evidence and information as to what's happening in the sort of smaller tributaries in our sort of headwaters that are obviously draining and feeding the River Lug and the River Wye. So this information is going to be very, very important going forward. So what we've been able to do, I've been in contact with Cardiff University, who have also put in a bid for further funding to promote citizen science type work in the catchment. And we're just waiting to hear on their bid. But basically the offer is there from Cardiff to help support this work going forwards over the next 6 months. and to help provide a network and a resource for supporting the citizen science projects going forward. So there's a meeting coming up later this month with relevant partners and stakeholders who are likely to be involved in this work. And as part of the sort of next few meetings, there'll be a workshop following that to look at, you know, what resources will be needed, what's in place already, what are the aspirations for citizen science going forward, to provide a supportive network that we can all use to share this information more widely across the catchment. Simon and Winehouse Foundation have very kindly offered to be part of that as well, and to use the excuse me, the Wide Catchment Partnership as a hub or a portal to allow this information to be sort of channeled and shared more widely. So I think that's going to be great going forward. So that's the plan. We're setting it up as we speak. So very grateful to Tom and to Andrew, who have already come forward. We've got other community groups that are willing to come and do some of this work as well. So I think it's a great opportunity going forwards, and hopefully we'll get some meaningful data. The other plan is to have an event in September where all of this is brought together and shared more widely, and also where we can work out how much funding we're going to need going forward to support this, you know, longer term development of this work going forward.
Good, thank you. Just to round this, Tom Tibbett or Andrew McRobb, did you want to come in just for a couple of minutes?
I'm very happy to give a brief update to the meeting, Chair.
Yep,
the Friends of the Upper Wye is now a fully constituted group, and we are in the rather long and tedious processes of obtaining a bank account, but that will very shortly be concluded. And we fully intend to go and fundraise off our own backs for our activities. And our activities broadly will be to implement some soluble reactive phosphate monitoring programs using citizens such as myself to collect the data. We're very much hoping that we can collaborate with academic partners such as the University of Cardiff to give us not only academic credibility, but also guidance and other useful information to make sure that the work we do is not a waste of time and that the data that we collect is actually genuinely useful. So we're looking for help with academic credibility and data management, but we think we have a solution for that with a collaboration with Freshwater Watch. The volunteers bit, that's kind of what we're thinking we will be responsible for doing, the recruitment thereof. And the fourth topic I wanted to raise was money. And I'm very, very grateful to all efforts made in the Environment Agency and other agencies to assist us with this effort to bring citizens monitoring to bear. But we will continue to try and fundraise ourselves and maintain a degree of financial independence. And anyone who wants to listen to us and talk about the data we collect would be very, very welcome at any time.
Good, thank you. That's really, really useful. Unless there are any other questions, anybody wants to come in, I can't see any hands. I think it's really useful and really important that this is going on, and it's something that I know Herefordshire Council loves to work with its communities, and this is something that would be ideal. I know there's a question from in the chat about whether NRW are also encouraging it. Andrew Osbaldeston, do you know if NRW are also encouraging this further up to the reaches? You're muted. Or Jenny.
Sorry. Yeah, that is the intention through the CABA partnership to develop this and work more closely with NRW with this type of work. Yeah, we've got the Wye Salmon Association in the top of the catchment as well. I know Woofer linking in with as well. So,
very good. Okay, good. Right, I'm going to move the meeting on because we've got just over a quarter of an hour. That's about it. I think the very next item is very quick. It asks basically for progress from NRW and EA on two cases that have received quite a lot of T, which is up a tributary, isn't it, to the River Wye. Not familiar with the river, but I don't suppose there's anybody here that's able to answer on behalf of NRW if the case is still being investigated and if there's any conclusion in relation to a summons served court case programmed. Is there anything like that? Anybody able to ask? If not, we'll just have to take it forward as a question again to NRW that we will need to advise on. The other one is, I know it's a live case and I'm only expecting a very quick answer, but it's to Jenny or Andrew in relation to the Kingsland incident that happened end of November. Is there any update that you can provide to the board on that?
Yeah, I think it's as you said, Mark. We appreciate there is a lot of concern and interest around the Kingsland incident. It is an ongoing legal case and there's an investigation taking place. So at the present time, we can't share any further information on that. But just to reassure people, you know, there is ongoing work on that incident and we will share further details when we can. But for legal reasons, we can't share anything else at the moment.
Yeah, totally understand that. Part of my portfolio is regulation, so that's what we expected. I think the board just wanted to be reassured that the case hadn't been dropped, in which case you could say that. So I think that's what I think the board also wanted to understand, because the Thanke case has been going on that many more months. So one would think they might be getting to a point where there's summonses served and maybe even a court date set. Helen, are you able to provide any information? Are you aware of anything?
No, I'm going to actually ask if we had any idea about timescales. I appreciate that it's, you know, sub judice or whatever, and you're gathering evidence.
All I can say, I suppose, on behalf of EA and NRW Radio 4 this morning, we're actually talking about the whole court, Crown and magistrates and how it's all blocked up. I know that our own regulatory officers for things like fly tipping or rogue trading or environmental health, they're all being held up at the moment. They can't hold court cases, so I should imagine that's not helping. But the Kingsland incident's quite recent. That's really only about a month and a half or so. The other case, I think, has been going on for several months, but we'll just keep it on the agenda really so that we're aware of what's going on. So I know there's a lot of interest from board members. I'm going to take us quickly now then on to the roundup. We're going to have to be very quickly. Much of the things have already been covered, so please don't feel that you've got to repeat what's already been said. But there's a list from our various agencies that are attending on where they are in delivering on our action plan, etc. Simon for the Y and Ask, or is it Kate for the Y and Ask? Do you want to give us just 2-3 minutes, please, and just a whirlwind tour?
I'll run through it literally as a reading. We've got 9, soon to be 11 farm advisors who are working to promote. I can provide this for the minutes if required. Farm advisors who are working and promoting and supporting innovation and best practice as on both sides of the border within the farming community. I would like to just make a note that we do welcome the increasing enforcement of basic rules by EA. It's still a fricassee, but it is happening. And this is supporting and providing validification for the farmers who have improved their practice, who are seeing some of the people that they were concerned about having their collars felt. And it's also encouraging those people to engage with us to try and solve problems. Probably of most relevance to this group, we're developing tools to deliver the NMP and to allow and to fit in with the Dutch judgment and the wider ecological restoration. I've got 2 full-time members of staff working to deliver this in the monitoring at the moment. We're working with the nutrient neutrality. So as far as first one is the wetlands, we finally have agreement. It came in yesterday from Dŵr Cymru. For how we want it to work, and we have agreement from the landowners, so we can now proceed proceed with the planning that's already away for Dilwyn, and I've engaged a land agent to submit the planning for Cannon Pine. We are also starting to work with soils. This is a new area. We weren't sure about certainty, but with the framework that we've got with the wetlands, there is the potential to use that with soils as well. and using the refocus data plus drain flow to quantify, we will be able to quantify savings from reduced applications, or that's the theory anyway, and we're trying to see if we can work that through with the certainty that Natural England require. We are also trying to overlay other benefits. This is James's point. So we've got carbon offsetting, you've got natural flood management, you've got the agri supply chain, you've got Welsh Government funding, all which could all potentially be overlaid through some sort of a tier, or some sort of a ecosystem or a natural capital platform. We're engaging 2 existing natural capital platforms that are single issue, and we're trying to see how we can layer it up so that we can start to bring the various funds to bear to hit the sweet spots where we'll get maximum benefit. The stuff with the Welsh Government is interesting because we are working at a high level within Welsh Government to see if we can get investment into manure pea export from Wales, and also retrofitting of the existing developments that are in there. The other thing that we're doing is trying to improve the database. We hope to be able to add biodiversity offsetting to that soon, but that's not here at the moment. The work on the trading platforms is probably 9 to 12 months away. We're also doing quite a lot of work to improve the monitoring and the understanding around the issues. So we're trying to improve our understanding around dissolved organophosphate, which I mentioned earlier, which is outside of current statutory monitoring, but seems to be a key driver for the eutrophication of the sac. And if it is sac failure that is the problem, then this is something that we need to get a handle on. We are improving our understanding of legacy P. This is through the Refocus, and that has been an enormous jump forward in terms of certainly our understanding, and it's something we can feed through to the farmers. We've installed a sonde in the Ithon system. We've only got 3 months worth of data for it at the moment, but what it is doing is it's supporting NRW's position that the Ithon's at about 22, 23 microns for soluble reactive phosphate, but total phosphate is peaking at about 2,500 microns, and that is associated with rainfall events, and it's averaging about 117 microns. So if there is a large dissolved organic phosphate fraction in that total phosphate, that would explain why algal blooms are being generated in the Ithon when the soluble reactive phosphate levels are below the threshold that the blooms will be developed. EA are funding us to install a sonde in the Froome. Thank you very much, Oz. And it will be in by March. It will measure SRP, total phosphate, and turbidity. We are working with EA, Cardiff University. This is what Oz was talking about. It's EA, NRW are engaged, Cardiff University, the Rivers Trust, the Wye Salmon Association, Friends of the Upper Wye, angling clubs, farmers, and river monitors to try and set up a catchment monitoring collective based on the same model as the Chesapeake Bay. It's fairly common in America, and it would be lovely to get one going on the Wye. We can then use an app to upload data in real time to a central website, and it's shared and everyone can use it and access it, but with the appropriate caveats. One of our mapping officers is currently in the process of mapping the soil types across the Wye and overlaying them with the P records that we've got. And then we can, at a big scale, catchment scale, start to work out the risk within the catchment. And it will also allow us to, at a big scale, determine when we overlay that with the mid-tier actions, we'll be able to start to quantify the benefit of, as Mary was asking and James was asking, we'll be able to quantify the benefits of the mid-tier actions that have been put in. The problem at the moment is that when you just use Farm Scoper and you don't actually know what was coming out in the first place, and so you can't do the benefit. So the error bars were too large, hence the reason we are now moving into mapping soils using the Refocus data and using existing loadings. And then that will allow us to quantify the benefit of the mid-tier actions that have been delivered in the catchments so far. In terms of the amounts, I was doing a quick back of the fag packet calculation validated with our management accounts when I was off screen. I think it's about £11.6 million has gone into farm advice and farm improvements in a combination of mid-tier and Y&S Foundation, and then you need to add into that catchment sensitive farming. So the sum has not been inconsiderable, but what we I've been looking around the country at other areas that are loaded with that have phosphate surpluses, and where farmers are monitoring drains and they're getting flows out of drains of around 120 microns, 150 microns. So we've got to start to look at that factor, and that might be why everything's coming together with Refocus over application as to why the mid-tier is not delivering to the level that it should have delivered, because we've had this other problem rearing up at us, which is phosphate coming out of drains.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Conscious we got to
through that in lightning quick time.
You have, and of all the bodies here, you've probably done the most, because you are Rivers Trust, and absolutely admirable work that you've been doing. But thank you for that. The next organisation is the Environment Agency on our list. I know you've already given a big update, Jenny. So is there anything else that you want to add, or is it that you've already updated?
Andrew had a couple of points that he wanted to add on behalf of Dave Throop, who can't be here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll try and be quick, Mark, because I'm conscious of time. But just picking up on the soil patrol work that we have been doing, I know there's been quite a bit of chat also about the sort of regulatory side of things, but we have been pretty busy since September, between September and December, with troops on the ground. We've identified hundreds of sites that pose a significant risk to soil erosion, and hence obviously phosphate, getting into watercourses. We've done over 170 inspections, farm inspections on those sites, at high risk sites. Encouragingly, 80% of those sites were seen to be sort of compliant, but that does leave 20% of sites that weren't seen to be compliant, with over 30 breaches. So those have been followed up as part of our enforcement response. We've had formal warning letters that have been sent out to those sites. They've received advice and guidance. We've been linking up with Natural England and Y&S Foundation with that work as well. Over 50% of land managers have actually put in measures in place to improve those issues that we've been seeing on site. Types of measures that we've been discussing previously with a lot of our work. So that's things like undersowing of crops, buffer strips, chisel, contour ploughing, some longer term measures and investments that have been made as well. So I think there's some really good stuff coming out of that, but clearly there's more to be done, and we're quite happy to pick up obviously with a presentation on what that means, the actual farming rules for water, how we're tackling it, and we'll give a bit more of a better explanation of what's going on there at the next meeting. Happy to do that. Just on the modelling information, I did get an update today from Damon Llewellyn. He's been doing a lot of the modelling work for us. And the two scenarios that we've looked at are looking at housing growth in line with projected growth figures for Herefordshire, and also we've looked at the programme under PR19 and what that means in terms of investment over the next sort of five-year period. And basically, what we're seeing, I'll just read very quickly some of the data that I've got here. The target P load, the predicted target P load in the lug down at Morderford at the bottom of the catchment for 2025 is 61.8 kilograms of phosphate per day, and we're looking at, with the projected growth and development over the next 5 years, we're seeing it's likely to be 66.2 kilograms per day, and that's assuming that housing growth goes ahead. So therefore we would look to have well, if we look at the wetlands, removing phosphate from the 2 wetlands we've got in place at the moment, that's 0.26 kilograms of phosphate being removed from those 2 wetlands. There's still a requirement to move 4.45 kilograms of phosphate per day for that area, for the bottom of the bottom of the lug. So of that, 3 kilograms per day is agriculture of that 4.45. So that's basically looking at housing growth and with the 2 wetland sites already in place. The other scenario that we had modelled was looking at obviously PR19 over the 5 years. The target at Morderford would be 61 kilograms of phosphate per day. Phosphate from all sources, again, would be looking at currently would be 67 kilograms per day. So we'd need to knock out 6 kilograms per day. So basically, again, with the 2 wetland scenarios, we would still need to remove 5.8 kilograms of phosphate per day would need to be taken out, and of that, 4 kilograms is from agriculture. So it's just demonstrating that, you know, without the diffuse measures, you know, there's still much that needs to be done. You know, we can't rely on, you know, the sort of water treatment. There still needs to be a reduction. So that just key headlines really, I suppose, from that.
Good. No, that's really helpful, Oz. Thank you. And I think going back to your comment about the farming rules 2018, that's reassuring that it's about 80% or something compliance, because I saw in the chat earlier on from Kate that there was a room of 200 farmers and only 3 put their hands up about knowing about the regulations. So hopefully there's a lot of shy or bashful farmers as opposed to ones that were ignorant of the rules, but hopefully the letter drop in October will help that. Also, in relation to you trying to find extra ways of reducing phosphates, fortunately, there are more wetlands that hopefully are on their way, which we can no doubt update you on. And exactly the points, I think, also we were talking about the nutrient management plan, trying to actually provide evidence as to the amount of phosphate being removed. This demonstrates, I suppose, the science behind it and why we need things like that for Natural England and other partners to be satisfied about certainty. Okay. So
I will get that data sent to the group.
That would help if they could pass it on.
It's a bit of a ramble on those figures, but if I'll pass it on so people can have a look at it.
Right. So that nicely sets us up for Natural England. Claire, Minette, is there anything that if you're hopefully still on the call, is there anything you want to add that hasn't been mentioned already, or is it all set?
I am just about, and there are things I could mention, but I'm conscious we've overrun already and I will need to leave. So I'll leave it there for now.
Okay.
And follow up any questions in the chat afterwards, if that's okay.
I mean, I'm happy to obviously go over to 5, but other people will have other calls to make or other commitments, so I'm conscious of that. We haven't got anyone on the call today from NRW, which is a shame, but Fergus, are you still on for Welsh Water? Anything else you want to add?
Just to summarise what we said before, we've got our AMP7, which is 2020-2025 programme, tackles 11 sites, as I said. We are working through delivering those. One of them at Prestine has just slightly a bit behind at the moment, but that's more because we've had a request from an existing trader. So we just have to make sure that our design takes account of any additional load we might see from them so we don't exceed any targets. We are working quite closely with Wynusk, as Simon explained, at Dilworn and Cannon Pine. We have had your sort of list of 8 preferred sites. And we're just checking the sample data for those sites at the moment. We did get, I think we got slightly mixed messages at one stage internally, but we should have that data. So we're just confirming that, making sure we've got that across all those sites. So that's the main thing from us.
Right, thank you very much. So next on our list, the planning authorities, Herefordshire. Liz Dubley, you still on the call? Can you just explain in relation to the wetlands MOU and interim development plan?
Yep. So the work on the wetlands is progressing. We've just gone in for pre-application of planning advice for each of the sites, and we have also engaged consultants to provide valuations for the land so that we can undertake negotiations with the landowners. As Fergus just said there, we've also been in contact with Welsh Water in order to be able to undertake some monitoring. For the interim phosphate delivery plan, we have just received the draft of stage 1 of the report, which is the phosphate calculator and the report behind it. So we just need to review that internally, and then we will share that with Natural England for comment, and also potentially to trial with developers. Stage 2 of the draft, which is looking at potential mitigation measures in order to be able to deliver nutrient neutrality for schemes, that is also underway and is due shortly, I understand from Ricardo. The MOU, we met with Natural England and the Environment Agency and Welsh Water just recently, and my understanding is that there is a reticence around the MOU. So we are looking at revising this to perhaps simplify it to more of a statement in principle, which we'll then share with all of those bodies for comment.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Liz. So the next item is, sorry, the next organisation is POWIS. Peter, is there anything else that we need to know in relation to what's happening?
No, I did, when I had, I think covered it earlier, just little spots from me. I think Ceredigion actually have a part of the catchment as well, but it's only a minuscule amount, mountainous area. And I see Forest of Dean mentioned, clearly Gloucestershire's still 2-tier as an authority, so whether the county council need to be involved as well at some point. Just
yes,
little
that's a good
spots.
point.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Okay, yeah, because it'd be county matters there. Okay, so we haven't got Forest of Dean or Monmouth with us. Brecon Beacons National Park, you've got a local planning authority. Anything that you wish to raise under this in relation to what you're doing to further this?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. As I mentioned, when we were doing the implications of the NRW guidance that they've issued, the interim guidance, we've got a local development plan and a national park management plan at quite a crucial time in their development, which we're going to have to take all this on board. We were moving that way anyway, but obviously this report having landed and the likelihood that other reports on the rivers in Wales is going to land either later today or after today, the rest of the week. It's been concentrating our minds in the development of those plans, and particularly responding in the National Park Management Plan to how we can show a leadership role to other organisations, landowners in the national park, and also what we would do with our land to seek to try and achieve what we've been talking about today, along with many other things, but as we're talking about this issue, particularly that. So yeah, apart from that, no further information. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Then to farming land colleagues, Nick, anything from Farm Herefordshire you want to add?
Really just to remind people that Farm Herefordshire is not a legal entity, but a collaboration between 12 organisations, many of whom are around the table. And the feeling being that we need to get consistent messages out to farmers. And I think that's still true. Whatever we come up with for the future, a collaborative approach has got to be the best way of selling it to the farming community. In terms of the network, we're going through a 2-stage review process, trying to make sure that we're fit for purpose depending on where the nutrient management plan goes in the next 2 to 3 years. And we're halfway through that. So awaiting the outcome of some of the decisions today.
Thank you, Nick. We haven't got FUW here, but we certainly have Sarah for NFU. would you like
Yeah.
to mention what's happening for yourselves?
We've got a couple of things to update you on. We had a meeting on the 27th of October, which focused on phosphate and the River Wye situation. This is NFU on the English side. We had a really good turnout. We had over 40 farmers there for an evening Teams meeting where we gave them an update on the action plan, you know, and the current discussion within the board, but also did quite a bit of work on farming rules for water, and had a good discussion about the rules and what that means, and you know how farmers are finding them and the sort of compliance issues surrounding that. And then the second thing is that Helen Dale from CLA and I have done a piece of work looking at farming practices within the catchment and putting together a questionnaire. This was mentioned at a previous board meeting. So we've come up between us with this questionnaire. The objective of that is to try to capture some more information about the mechanisms that farmers are employing on a voluntary basis. So this is things like cropping change, or you know, purely voluntary things that farmers have implemented to try to reduce phosphate. So it doesn't include actions that would be picked up within an agri-environment scheme. So the work that Helen and I have done, that's completed, that's now gone to our NFU research team, who are going to put that into the software for us. There is a bit of a delay because they're obviously focused on sort of national policy work, but they've assured me that they'll have that ready to be circulated to farmers via CLA NFU networks later on later on this month, they told me, but I think it'll probably more likely to be the end of February, and we'll get that circulated, and then we can have a little piece of work there where we can start to get a bit of information but also try to raise the profile of the issue as well.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And that leads nicely to HKILG. So Jim or Mary, probably anything that you wish to advise us on what your group's doing?
If it's okay with you, Mark, I think I'll email everybody because it's I know time's running out and I don't want to keep going on and on. Basically, the report was going to just mention a few problems that we've got as the kind of victim's the wrong word, but we're the end person that all of this affects. But I wanted to also make sure that everybody was aware that it isn't just the construction industry, it's our communities and it's the river. These are the things that aren't getting invested in, they're not getting fixed. And so while we all have these meetings, and Jim and I are committed to turning up to every meeting you can offer us, the meetings don't seem to be achieving anything. So my headings, for example, are a lack of consistency, a lack of action, a lack of urgency, a lack of data, a lack of evidence. You know, there's so many things that we haven't been able to do, but there is a cost to this. And it's people like me, people like Jim, it's all the people we work with, but it's villages that aren't having houses, it's schools that don't get kids into them because there aren't new houses. It just goes on and on. So I am going to email you because I've written it out, so I might as well use it.
No, okay, that's absolutely fine.
Just one quick thing. We're all talking about the fact that it's an agricultural problem primarily. Now that is uncomfortable and it doesn't sit well with any of us, I can tell, but it needs to be something that we now focus on, as the solutions must come from changes to agriculture. If you're in housing, every year building regs changes, so they ask you to get better every single year. That could be materials you're not allowed to use, systems you're not allowed to use, so many different things, how windows open, like every kind of level of detail is considered, and you have months in which to absorb it, change, find the new product, and to deliver a product that needs to be compliant. So we're only asking agriculture to do what other industries do all the time. And if we don't do it, the cost to all of us is too great. So we've all agreed where the problem is. We know what the solutions are. We must do something about it.
Okay, thank you. If you do email that on, or if you email that to Jane, Little will forward it on for you, but that's really helpful.
If I could very quickly, Mark, so just a bit of an update on it's been mentioned earlier, but just a little more detail on the meeting with Jessie Norman. So we continue to liaise with Jessie, and Jessie's effectively putting agencies which can be costed. There's a short time frame for it, but if it can be done in time for the spending review or the budget, I believe, then effectively government money is available to fund a solution. So a lack of money can no longer be an excuse, and a lack of political will from both Herefordshire and national government, I'd say, is no longer an excuse, because we've got good political will behind it. There's now apparently money available. So it's just a call to the agencies to take this matter with the urgency it needs and to really get on with it, really. That's all I have to say.
No, that's right. You can't say it at a more public forum, and this is obviously being live streamed, and it is a recording that can be watched later on. So, point well made. And no, I have a lot of empathy for your group, as you know, not least from the planning side, because we do need to build houses. All of the local planning authorities need to deliver houses, and it has implications if we can't. Okay. Unless there's any burning updates from anybody else, I was going to move on to the next item. Now I see that we haven't got any members of public in our waiting room, so that means that our members of public have come in and joined the board, and I'm thinking a number of questions have come in from people that perhaps would normally have been held in the waiting room, and that's lovely. That's okay. So colleagues from CPRE, CPRW, and Citizens Project, etc., they've come in already, and we've had a number of questions. So we'd originally allocated 15 minutes for questions. What I wanted to do really was keep that brief if we possibly can, because I think we've had so many questions throughout. Both Councillor Swinglehurst and myself have tried to facilitate any questions coming up from people that aren't board members, which, you know, hopefully obviates the necessity to take too many questions now. But I will take a couple of questions if there's any. I see, well, I've got, I think, a clapping hand there from Tom, I think, rather than a question. Are there any questions from the public that haven't been asked, and we can try and field those? If not, and I sense we're probably feeling quite exhausted, so I'm going to just use the metaphor of taking over the aeroplane controls from the chair, Councillor Swinglehurst, in our solar aeroplane that we took off from, didn't we? Somewhere around the source of the River Wye, Councillor Swinglehurst, and whilst you were suffering from your migraine, I took the controls, and now I think we can be landing the aircraft, and I think you might want to close the meeting down as we pull into the Chepstow airstrip. Are you there, Councillor Swinglehurst? Would you like to take the last?
Oh, you're receiving me over.
Yeah, okay, that's how I feel.
I just thought it was easier than me coming in and out and breaking a partner. Just simpler to pass it over. Thank you very much, Mr. Wilmot, for taking over. So yeah, we haven't got a date, but it'll probably be April-ish next meeting. Thank you all very much for your contributions today. Thank you to those people like Tom Tibbets and Andrew McRobb who are going to be part of this citizens project. I just think that's brilliant. We all really want to do our bit to fix this problem, and it's great that people will have the opportunity to do that. I was going to say, I did put this in the chat to Oz, the dashboard, which is the most public facing element of the board's activity. Could you please make sure that that's up to date? So we've got the catchment data is sort of different and separate and frankly quite difficult to understand. But if the dashboard could be refreshed, that would be great.
Yeah. I'll chat Jenny afterwards, Jen.
Yeah, it is up to date at the moment, Alyssa.
Is it still referencing AMP6?
Maybe that's one thing that's just not been spotted, but the data on it is up to date.
We haven't got anything subsequent to 2018. Okay.
There should be. Oh, I would double check, but it went back online.
Yeah, because I thought it was being
October
updated,
last year.
but I
Yeah,
had a
it
look
should
and
be
thought,
fine.
it's funny, it's quite a lot of what looked like. Anyway, but I
double
apologise if
check
I'm
it.
wrong about that. If you could just check, that would be super. Lovely. Thank you all very much indeed for your contributions and your attendance today. And can we please pause the live streaming? Stop the live streaming. Thank you.